So my name is Jacqueline Yu. I am honored to lead this event and work alongside inspiring speakers and dedicated volunteers to put up this exciting program for you today. So what has brought us together here today? We draw inspiration from two important sources. The first is the venue. The Guildhall, built in 1445, the Guildhall has served as an important place for guilds and merchants who play pivotal roles in shaping the society and the community. Our themes, sustainable futures, building for good, resonate deeply with the Guildhall's legacy. The historic place has hosted centuries of initiatives focused on economic advancement, sustainability, and the public good. The second inspiration, that's from our research on tracking success of the Good Business Charter. A simple and impactful accreditation systems that promote ethic and responsible business practices. We are honored to receive the prestigious ESRC Festival Award, which has made today's forum possible. The GBC is one of our valued partners and sponsors, so thanks for GBC. Our research explores how effectively organizations are adopting and implementing the ethic framework promoted by the Good Business Charter. Our findings are encouraging. Businesses have powerful influence not only on their supply chains and the markets, but also on redefining success beyond profit. They are driving changes that create long-term values for the environment, society, and the next generations. Although there's a complex of economic, social, and society challenges they face, but these organizations are developing truly innovative solutions. So today's forum isn't just about discussing the challenges. It's about uncovering opportunities for business that drive positive and transformative change. We are delighted to present an exceptional lineup of speakers from diverse industries. They will share their insight into how they're embedding responsibility and sustainability into their strategies, with a particular focus on three and interconnected themes: responsible business, sustainable supply chains, and business and nature. They will showcase how innovation and disruption can help tackle challenges while creating opportunities for growth and positive impact. Before we begin, I'd like to extend our thanks to our sponsors, the Economic and Social Research Council, Natural Environment Research Council, Fix Our Food, Good Business Charter, and the School for Business and Society, University of York. Special thanks also go to our participating organizations, Aviva, BioD, RBC Capital Market, J2.com and J2 Holidays, Net Power UK, Next Energy Capital, Rachel Sound, Tech Buyer, TSB, Ray Planet, RPS TerraTech, Clarisis, and Trainline for their support in making today's possible. Now it's my pleasure to introduce the Dean of the School for Business and Society, Professor Bob Doherty, who will formally open our forum. Thank you, Bob.
Before I start, I must say, and I've got to say this, Dr. Jacqueline Yu, what an amazing venue you have secured for us for today's event. And as Jacqueline said, this venue dates back to 1455 and was built for the Guild of St. Christopher and St. George. And we could tell you, we could spend all day talking about the stories of things that have happened here, but we're going to be talking about the future, Sustainable Futures Forum. And I'm so privileged to be here welcoming everybody, ladies, gentlemen, friends, guests, colleagues, and also the Lord Mayor. And we're going to be, it's a day of activity. There's some fantastic panels, people who've got great experience of building good, responsible business. And that's why we're here, to share ideas, really set us on the next trajectory. And again, thank you, Jacqueline, for organising everything. So I'm Bob Doherty. I'm the Dean of the School for Business and Society, which was formed about 2.5 years ago. And it brought together the School of Management and the Department of Social Policy and Social Work at the University of York, really to take an interdisciplinary look at tackling problems such as poverty, climate change, problems in the food system, so on and so forth. We face a lot of challenges, complex societal challenges, and we need to bring disciplines together to tackle those. And this event is a manifestation of that, where we're bringing people together from different perspectives who are really tackling the issues of, responsible business and sustainability. This event is very close to our heart at the School of Business and Society, and very close to my heart. If you know anything about my background, I spent 5 years establishing Divine Chocolate, fair trade pioneer, and also more recently spent 6 years as trustee of the Fair Trade Foundation. So fairness and good responsible business is very close to my heart. So just moving on, I've got a few thank yous. I want to thank the Economic Social Research Council, which is part of the UK Research and Innovation. They provided us some of the funding for today's event and supported the work on the Good Business Charter. They really do tackle complex societal problems. And today is the ESRC Festival of Social Sciences. So up and down the country, there are 41 other events that are taking place, all scheduled, all focused on sustainability and complex societal challenges. Also, I want to thank our other key partner is the Good Business Charter. Julian Richer, and we've been working with them, led by Jacqueline and Nicholas Please, our Associate Dean for Research, looking at the impact on organisations of the Good Business Charter. And it's a groundbreaking accreditation system encouraging responsible business practices through a set of 10 key principles. Those key principles are real living wage, fairer hours and contracts, employee well-being, employee representation in terms of the governance of the organisation, equality, diversity and inclusion, environmental responsibility, paying fair tax, a commitment to customers, and ethical sourcing and prompt payment to suppliers. Having worked with supermarkets when I was at Divine Chocolate, that's very important. Prompt payment to suppliers. So those values are very close to the heart of the School for Business and Society, hence our working together. It's a pioneering accreditation system, and we're going to be talking about that today. And for me, it makes perfect business sense. Businesses are part of communities. Businesses employ people. Why should we not be responsible businesses practicing all those kind of approaches? And it fits very, very closely, this particular approach, the Good Business Charter, with the School for Business and Society and its mission. Notably, the City of York became the first ever Good Business Charter city in June 2021, and today's forum will talk about this. We will also provide insights into responsible and sustainable business practices and explore the role of businesses in shaping a sustainable future. I have the pleasure and privilege of introducing our 4 initial keynote speakers. And I must say, what a lineup. We've got 4 fantastic speakers who are going to pass on their wisdom for about 5 to 7 minutes. And our first speaker to open this important forum, and it's my honour to introduce the Lord Mayor of York, Councillor Margaret Wells. And Margaret tells me this is actually her, since becoming mayor, 201st event. Can you imagine? Can you imagine the diary? Yesterday she tells me she was at a kind of learning disability forum and at a barn dance. So the diversity of what you do is just amazing. And she's a pivotal figure representing this historic city, and she brings invaluable insights and perspectives to this forum. And what you probably didn't know is she actually is a student of the University of York. She studied social policy at the University of York, which is part of the School for Business and Society. So, Margaret, without further ado, over to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And from that build-up, it can only be a total disappointment. I was a little bit worried about coming here to speak because I didn't know what I could offer you. I'm not a business leader, an innovator, an investor, a business academic. I'm just an ordinary person. But what I do is I represent a lot of ordinary people. And having been born and bred in York and lived here for the last 60-odd years, I've welcomed some of the changes. I've not welcomed others, but I have an insight as to what people in York want and what we expect. I'm going to start talking about where I think our future begins, and that's actually very firmly in the past, because York's history of leadership and resilience makes it a natural hub for forward thinking. And we honour our past whilst embracing the future, and that's something that we can demonstrate so well in York. We're extremely lucky that our history has been maintained, but it's only been maintained because of poverty. When we had the Industrial Revolution, we had the cotton industry in the West Yorkshire and Lancashire, and they were knocking down all the old buildings and building these fantastic things. In York, we missed out on that and we couldn't. It's only now that we can appreciate the importance of older buildings and things. But that too brings its own heartache, because our planners now have to judge what's best. How can we preserve these buildings, and how can we plan for the future when we've got roads that were built for horse and carts? And so that's a headache that we're always trying to do. But we have been very successful in reimagining spaces. Take the space we're in, the Guildhall. Our ancestors were traders, and we used the River Ouse as a landing place. And so we built a landing place just at the back here. And then we built a lane to take the trade into the city. That was known as Common Lane. It's actually still here. It's under this building and it goes to the river. It's a bit dangerous. I have seen it. I haven't walked it though. As time moved on, we built a hall here for people. It was known as Common Hall. It wasn't a substantial hall, but that dates it back to the 1200s. And then we built this Guildhall on top of that. Because, as we've heard, the guilds wanted a meeting place, and so did the administration, the council, because that's always been a big link in York, the council and business. And we've got records dating back to when this building was first built. They were very pleased that they got this new building, so pleased that they rewarded the workmen with threepence to celebrate laying the foundation. If you're wondering what threepence would have bought you in the 1400s, apparently it's about 5 dozen eggs, a spade, a pillow, or more likely 16 pints of beer. Council meetings are still held on this site. That we have upstairs a very grand Victorian council chamber, which was completed in the late 1800s. And until recently, that was where we still held our council meetings. I've been in there. It's not the most accessible place, which is why we now hold our council meetings in this space here. One of the things that you might have noticed sitting here is the stained glass window. It's absolutely beautiful. It's not an original. It was put in, I'm going to say, in about the 1950s. During the Second World War, York was spared from all the bombs, except for one raid, which was the Beiderbecke raids, and the Guildhall was hit. And it took 18 years to rebuild the Guildhall, and a modern stained glass window was there. It depicts 5 aspects of our city's history: war, architecture, civic affairs, commercial trade, and education. It actually cost about 21 million, I think, to do it. We've had renovations since then, and these are the ones that are so important. The Guildhall is a complex of grade 1 and 2 listed buildings, which causes problems for everyone. But what we wanted to do was to highlight our 600-year celebration of business and commerce and culture. And that's what we've tried to do. We've tried to incorporate that. We've tried to look at modern methods of doing this. I guess the best example in the Guildhall is the water source heat pump, which provides sustainable green energy from the River Ouse. Not only does it mean lower running costs, but it helps reduce carbon emissions. And another thing that we're proud of with the renovations is the use of the River Ouse. We use that to transport equipment and materials to avoid construction traffic going through our narrow streets. And that's really a nod to how the Guildhall started. It started on the river, and the renovations took it back to the river. And following completion, it was leased to the University of York as a centre for start-up businesses. So a hall that was built to deal with business and civic life has actually come full circle, and it now houses education, business, and the administration, because we still have our council meetings here. So what better place for your conference to take place? I'd like to say just a couple of words, if I may, about the alliance between these 3 prongs, which are beautifully illustrated in our stained glass window. The University of York, businesses, and the council. And these are the things that will shape your discussions. The university fosters a culture of research, innovation, and learning, and it has a commitment to education. It cultivates a vision and mission that not only prepares the next generation, but it educates. We need government support, and that's where the council fit in, to help us navigate to a more sustainable future. We've got a thriving business community in York, and we need these entrepreneurs in the private sector to be committed to sustainable practices. York is an ideal place for leading the development for sustainable futures. We have the factors to create a more sustainable future. We just need to pull everything together. When we look at the future, we have the university, the council, the businesses. Individually, they're all brilliant, but together, they're awesome. And we can make the changes we need. So I'd like to wish you a fruitful and worthwhile discussion today. And what more important topic can we discuss than our sustainable future? So thank you very much.
I must say, Lord Mayor, thank you for setting a wonderful tone for the remainder of the day. I picked out a key word from what you were talking about, which is reimagination, reimagining the future to be a more sustainable future, and also that wonderful story of sustainability on a scale, on a scale, the scale being the Guildhall, which was fantastic, and also the importance of collaboration came across. Public-private partnerships working together with the university. So thank you for that, Lord Mayor. Wonderful words. I have the pleasure now of introducing one of my esteemed colleagues, Professor Kieran Trehan, who's Pro-Vice-Chancellor at the University of York for Enterprises, Partnerships and Engagement. Professor Trehan is a global authority on women's entrepreneurship, known for her commitment to fostering impactful partnerships between academia and industry, and really does personify reimagining. So over to you, Kieran.
Good morning and a warm welcome, everybody. Can you hear me? Okay. I want to start with the words of a song from Bruce Springsteen, and no, I haven't lost the plot, and I am at the right venue. I'm working on a dream, though sometimes it feels so far away. I'm working on a dream, and I know it will be mine someday. What do the words of a Bruce Springsteen song have to do with today's forum? Well, for me, the answer is really simple. Today is about our values, our dreams, our commitments. But that's not enough on its own. A decade of dreaming for a more sustainable future, a decade of dreaming for more responsible business, decades of research, decades of leading through the work that Julian and others in this room have done. So today I want us to take a sharp look, both at celebrating our achievements, but also being open to the challenges ahead of us. Because working on a dream has to be a collective effort. It has to be about how we shape a sustainable world where business isn't just a driver for profit, but a force for global responsibility and resilience. But why here and why now? Well, you've already heard from two of our keynote speakers about the history of York. But history is only as good as what we do with it in our present and in our future. So heritage can't be the custodian of the status quo. Heritage and history has to be a driver and a force for critical and impactful change. And so for me, I like the way that the past, the present and the future coalesce, and we're better than the Guildhall and the City of York. This was one of my very first projects during COVID when I moved to York, and it was a building site. So if we dream and if we believe, then amazing things can and do happen, as you will hear throughout the day. So let me just take a step back then and think about the purpose and our role today. York has always been a place of vision and resilience and continues to be. Its historic walls aren't simply a tourist attraction. They've witnessed so much over centuries around innovation, preservation and adaptation. So it feels very fitting that today we're exploring good business within this historical context. So the question that I want to address in the next 5 minutes is, how can business today actively shape a sustainable future? Not the good news stories, not the press coverage, but work on the ground in the everyday mundaneness of what we do. So for me, it focuses around and revolves around three critical areas: responsible business, responsible supply chains, and the interdependence of business, sustainability, and nature. But they're not isolated conversations. They are all interconnected. We're all in this room because we share a passion and a commitment to not just shaping the present and the future, but being able to contribute to what is already an increasingly fragile world and fragile businesses. So you as the audience, the business leaders, the investors, the innovators, the academics, people on the ground all have a central role to play in this journey, because each of us brings insights, expertise, and commitment to making a genuine impact. So what role does a university play? I love it when people say, I know, Kieran, but you live in that kind of ivory tower. What do you know about the real world? Well, I'm the daughter of a first-generation migrant. I'm the daughter who grew up in the East End of London, when the East End of London doesn't look like it looks like now, where you're told nothing would ever become of you. So universities, and universities like York, are a critical player in this region if we're going to drive good, responsible, sustainable business. It's not simply about the research, it's how you use that research to make a measurable difference. And you'll hear some of those examples throughout the day. It's research, it's innovation, it's practical learning. So it isn't simply about educating future leaders, it's about providing groundbreaking research that helps us address real-world challenges. It's a place where sustainability isn't just studied, it's lived, it's embedded, and it's acted on. And the School of Business and Society absolutely epitomises those values. It's in the very fabric of what they do. So if we are the leaders of today, how do we ensure the leaders of tomorrow are in this room next time round? How do we equip them with the knowledge and the tools that they need to tackle some of the most complex challenges with purpose and integrity? So our strengths don't end there. York's entrepreneurial spirit is something that is really dear to my heart. What I think is really important in the work that we do at York is its fabric, it's its ecosystem. It's where large firms, small firms, startups come together, committed to wanting to develop sustainable practices. Because it's these enterprises that are contributing bold ideas. They're the ones that are offering the practical solutions to reduce the environmental impact, making sure there's fair pay for fair work. So in many ways, what we're trying to collectively do is reshape our businesses and our industries from within. So our rich history and our traditions create a vibrant entrepreneurial and academic community. For me, York really does stand out as a place where innovation meets responsibility. It's a city where heritage fuels forward thinking, where business, academia, and government have to converge to pave the way for a more sustainable work. They can't be empty words. They have to be through our lived actions. So how does this then relate to the work of Julian Richer and Jenny and colleagues around the Good Business Charter? So for me, what sets the Good Business Charter apart is its unique power to blend ethical values with business success seamlessly in a world where many see a trade-off between integrity and growth. Profit and money are often seen as dirty words. Well, they're not, because we can't survive with one without the other. But what the Good Business Charter allows us to do is to think and imagine differently. It empowers businesses to meet their social and their environmental responsibilities. But it isn't about responsibility, it's about that's just the right thing to do. That makes good business sense. So if you're doing it because that's what's being asked of you. Don't. Do it because that's good business. So I guess as I conclude, as we engage in today's discussion, for me, this is not a sacrifice. It's an investment in a sustainable, trust-driven and resilient future. Because I want to work in a place and a city and a region where responsible business is at the very heart of what we do. I want to work in an institution that walks the talk, that has purpose and is purposeful. So today, I guess I ask you to do two things. That today we're not here to talk and do more talking. We do a lot of that in York. I hope what we're here to do today is to share, inspire, and drive real change, because the future of sustainable business isn't a distant horizon. It's a choice that we make, but we have to make together. And so my ask is, today I hope we create a future where integrity, responsibility, and prosperity go hand in hand, because that's what good business is. And I guess it really is time for action, because to talk means we're not ready, and that's so much easier. So today has to be about action. It's a moment in time opportunity for us not to just build a responsible future, but to build a footprint and a legacy for generations to come. And for me, it's a form of activism, because not only does it capture the intellectual agenda, it also is about engaging with the hearts and minds of the communities that shape us and are served by us, and we have a responsibility to do. So today I'm asking you to do three things. I want you to deliberately be designed to be different in your businesses. I hope we see things differently, and most of all, I hope we make a measurable difference through the work that we do and the impact that we make. Thank you.
Thank you, Kieran, for those inspiring words. And you are a kind of leader in building partnerships between the university and the public and the private sector, and you do an amazing job in doing that. And these kind of events are a result of that work. So thank you for that. I have the pleasure of introducing our third speaker of the morning, the amazing Julian Richer. Julian is a prominent English entrepreneur, philanthropist, and author, and celebrated as the founder and managing director of Richer Sounds Retailers. Now, I was sitting down in my living room last night, looking around, and I have a Wi-Fi, I have a music system, sound system from Richer Sounds, a widescreen TV from Richer Sounds, a digital radio from Richer Sounds, very high quality products, and a really, really amazing high street retailer. But beyond his achievements, he's also a passionate advocate for ethical capitalism and social responsibility, having founded the Good Business Charter to promote responsible business practices. His dedication to sustainability and social justice has led to his impactful work in areas including human rights, animal welfare, social housing, and the fight against injustice. And you would have seen outside when you registered his amazing book, The Ethical Capitalist. I must recommend you do read that. It's a really, really lived experience read with some visionary ideas. And just a shout out for his amazing column in the Sunday Times. And this week, do read it, because it's got a very, very interesting analysis of some forthcoming policy changes in the housing market. Over to you, Julian. Thank you.
What an introduction. If I need an agent, Bob, you're the man. No, fantastic. How kind. Quick thank yous, because I thought I was a good negotiator. I started with a 3-hour slot and ended up at 7 minutes, so I've got to be quick. But huge thanks to Jacqueline for arranging the event, for Bob for the lovely introduction, for Kieran, for Nicholas' support he's given us, the the Lord Mayor coming along today, and speakers and guests. So, wow, responsible business, absolute foundation stone for a sustainable future, I believe. I'll give you a quick background and let you understand where I've come from here. I'm not an academic, as you've probably gathered. I don't know if you can hear me all right. Is that okay? Can you hear me at the back? Fantastic. So I started in business when I was 14. My parents encouraged it because they didn't have a lot of money, and opened my first shop at 19, and it grew into a national chain of electronics stores. And thanks for the business, Bob. I need the money. Very kind. And it's a really tough environment. Consumer electronics, ferociously competitive, actually, and a lot of our competitors have gone to the wall. We have a couple of modest claims to fame. We're in the Guinness Book of Records for the highest sales per square foot of any retailer in the world. We have a gender pay gap in favour of women, very unusual in our sector. The Which Consumers Association have voted us the best retailer in the land of any kind for 6 years, the last 6 years in a row. But the most important one I'm proud of is that we give 15% of our profits to charity. That's the highest percentage, as far as we know, in the country of any business. And we've got teams out there doing terrific work, not least the team, the Good Business Charter, some of whom are here today. So I guess I've been through 50 years of business, and I guess I've learned a lot. I've survived dramas and crises and ups and downs and recessions. The overriding thing I've learned, though, is all about the people. And what I mean by that is you'll see a completely different output from people depending on how you treat them. And a turning point for me, I've got my stopwatch running, by the way, don't worry, I will stick to 7 minutes. But I read a book in 1982 by two academics called In Search of Excellence. I was 23 then. In Search of Excellence by Tom Peters and Rob Waterman. And they analysed the most successful business in the States. And they discovered that the only things they had in common is that they treated their staff well and their customers well. Who knew, right? Anyway, it was the eureka moment for me. And I took a microscope and knife to my little business and rebuilt it. And profits went north. And I was really pleased to have read that book. I settled down in the business, and a few years later, this guy moved to Yorkshire, to Leeds, who didn't know many people up here. His name was Archie Norman, and he'd come to turn around Asda, the supermarket chain, which was in a shocking state, on the edge of bankruptcy. And a mutual friend said he should meet me. And I had a bit of a quirky reputation when I was in my 20s for doing some, unusual stuff. Anyway, he invited me to work with him at Asda. I went in 92, and we did hundreds of things. I won't take credit for lots of things like logistics, IT, distribution, but I was very involved in the people stuff. I'm talking about customer service, staff motivation, cultural change, communications, and suggestion schemes. And what we discovered was the things that we'd done in our little business, mostly young guys selling stereos, worked with their 70,000 colleagues, as we renamed them. They used to be called management and staff. And I said, no, we're all together here. Let's call them colleagues. And they do, to this day, they still call them that. Anyway, it worked really well, and he turned the business around, and in 1999 he sold it to Walmart for £6.7 billion. I think it's the biggest turnaround in British retail history to this time. So a great experience. I wrote a book about it called The Richer Way. It was just talking about how to get the best out of people, because I'd seen it work in a tiny business and a huge business, and I knew I really felt I was onto something. In that book, I didn't bring any of those today, but it's been out 30 years, and it still sells very well. Then I started researching capitalism, went back to my business, and I discovered that capitalism has been pretty awful through history. I've got 3 minutes left, by the way, in case you think I'm going on too much. But capitalism's been responsible for thousands of years through exploitation, colonialism, slavery, pollution, dreadful, often based on greed and not much else. But I did feel there was another type of capitalism, and this was certainly the capitalism that I was, as we call it, responsible business now, that I was trying to advocate. And good capitalism it's not a black and white situation. I do believe there are two types, and good capitalism, or responsible business as we now call it, can provide decent quality jobs, products and services we love, we enjoy, not exploit staff, not rip off customers, and pay taxes for the hospitals and schools we so badly need. So that's the capitalism I support and I like, and I wrote a book about how society needs to differentiate between these two types. And I've done it from a position not of academic brilliance, clearly, but from actually doing it for a long, long time. Now, not only do I sort of think it's the right thing to do, not only do I sleep better at night, but it's made my business really successful in a really tough environment by paying staff a bit more, by going the extra mile for customers, by being honest in all the dealings we have with, we call them stakeholders, all the different groups we come into contact with. So having written the book, I've got just under 2 minutes left. Having written the book, and by the way, I bought a few copies here today, so they're completely free. With my confidence, if you'd like a copy, take one with pleasure, help us spread the word. But I then felt, rather than writing about it, I wanted to do a bit more. And I felt that the public wanted to support responsible business. And we've discovered since that the TSB did some fantastic work on this, and they discovered 97% of the public want to spend their money with responsible businesses, but they don't know who they are, because the bad guys don't say, don't shop with us, we don't pay our tax. So we needed a signpost. And I felt very strongly about this, to differentiate, to recognize good business practice, and to send customers to those great businesses. So I came up with the idea of the Good Business Charter, got the CBI and TUC in a room. They'd not been in a room much before, and they worked together really well. And I dragged Jenny in, who's the most wonderful, fantastic, talented person, worked with me on some other products, and I sort of encouraged her to build it up and take it on, which she very kindly agreed to do, and she's been amazing. So that's a bit about the Good Business Charter. It's, as we've heard already from Bob, it's got 10 components, and it's a high bar, and we're proud of that, because we want customers, the public, to know that if you see a Good Business Charter organisation, you know that it's passed the test of all 10 components. We don't let them in organisations in with just 5. So how are we doing? Right, I better wrap up. I'm terribly sorry. Anyway, that's the Good Business Charter. I've gone on over a minute. I'm really sorry, but I felt this is important. I want to thank you all for your support. If you're not a Good Business Charter organisation already, please come and join us. If you're a member of the public and you don't have a business, look out for Good Business Charter organisations. Thank you very much for coming here today and for listening to me. Thank you. Sorry.
Wow, fantastic, Julian. It's a great example of how you integrate successful, making profit with being responsible and ethical. It's just a perfect case study. So thank you very much. And Julian became an honorary graduate of the University of York in 2022. And I know, Kieran, you had the honour of doing the speech. And you were a great friend of the university and a great friend to me. And thank you for all that. And thank you for being with us today. Last but by no means least, and this guy has got, if you've got a busy diary, come and have a look at James Farrer's diary, because he's Chief Executive of the new combined York and North Yorkshire Mayoral Authority. And there's been a brainchild behind devolution here in the region. And there's a lot of expectation and responsibility that comes with that. You've got a new government, a Labour government that wants economic growth plans to come from the region. And James is a champion. He really is a champion of public-private partnerships, of delivering innovation, reimagining the future. And there is no better person to steer the new combined mayoral authority during the next phase of economic history in York and North Yorkshire and the UK. And without further ado, we're so delighted you're with us, because I know how busy you are. Over to you, James. Thank you.
Thank you, Bob. So hopefully most of you know that we elected a mayor in York and North Yorkshire in May this year. David Scaith is your first elected mayor, and my job is to put into action his kind of desires and what his vision for the region is. I think today is really, really important for a number of reasons, because one of the really things that stood out when David came in was we were looking at driving the economic growth and that economic agenda, and we were looking at transport, we were looking at housing, we were looking at business, and he put community at the heart of it. So the first thing he did, that understanding that we want to drive the well-being of York and North Yorkshire, but to drive that economic well-being, you need to get your communities right. It's about people, it's about well-being, it's about those communities. So now as a combined authority, and we're just coming up to 6 months in with the mayor, every decision we make, everything we look at it in the context of what impact does that have on the communities of York and North Yorkshire. I think that's been a really refreshing change for us as an organisation, in that we're there to drive growth and there to make a difference, but actually putting people at the heart of it is really, really important. And I think there's two things I'd like to just kind of talk about this morning. And firstly is a really positive experience that we've just had. So the mayor's just recruited his business board to advise him on how we kind of drive that growth. And we've recruited a board which stretches from Scarborough to Skipton, It's got large corporates down to startups, and it's got manufacturing, it's got digital and creatives, and a whole raft of different sectors around it. And one thing stood out in those interviews, so these are like the best business leaders in the region. None of them talked about profit. None of them talked about growth. They talked about people. They talked about how they get the best out of their people by looking after them, by their well-being. They talked about the sustainability agenda and how they're at the forefront of that sustainability, because they understand that if you get those bits right, the profit and the growth happens. It's not the other way around. You don't generate profit and therefore decide to look after your people. You look after your people, you do business in the right way, and then as a consequence, your customers will be happier, your staff will be more motivated and therefore more productive, and therefore you will be more successful as a business. And we interviewed, so we had over 100 applications, we interviewed over 30, and it was the one common factor across every sector, wherever they came from in York and North Yorkshire, that all these business leaders talked about. So when we're here today talking about the importance of sustainable business, actually we're not talking about it because it's the right thing to do. We're talking about it because it's what's going to drive the success of your business. It's what's going to drive the success of York and North Yorkshire. And as a combined authority, that's what we're here to do. We know that the success of York and North Yorkshire will be delivered by the businesses. Jobs are created by growing businesses. And actually, those growing businesses are telling us that they grow by treating their staff well, by operating in a sustainable way and good business practices. So as a combined authority, we're absolutely behind today's agenda. And we understand that the economic future of York and North Yorkshire has been driven by sustainable business, and the future of York and North Yorkshire will be driven by even more sustainable business. And then that then moves on to the second side of things, and that's what we're trying to do as a region is understand, where do we have a genuine competitive advantage? Where does it make sense to come to York and North Yorkshire rather than going to Manchester or to Leeds or to anywhere else in the UK? And actually, the overwhelming thing, and when we've identified our growth priorities where we are nationally significant, is about our natural assets and how we make the most of our natural assets. Now, whether that's food and farming at one end, whether that's then relating to the bioeconomy at the other end, or actually whether that's around our historic heritage and the culture and the innovation that can be derived from those, actually the assets that we have in York and North Yorkshire make us very, very distinctive and actually will underpin lots of the major growth opportunities that we have in the future. So we don't look at our fields and our wonderful kind of dales and moors and agricultural land and just see it as a beautiful kind of landscape. We see it as an economic driver. We understand that by investing in the natural assets of a region, you will deliver growth, you will deliver sustainability, and you'll deliver welfare and better communities across the whole of our patch. So one of the first things the new government, obviously we had a Labour government as well, the government told us to do was to identify our priorities for our 10-year growth plan. And we identified 5 priorities. And they are about digital, but digital linked to our natural assets and the infrastructure and our creative. They're about sustainable places and delivering those. But then it's about food and farming, it's about the bioeconomy, and it's about clean energy. So it's all about making the most of what we have. And the Mayor today talked about the history and the heritage of this wonderful building and the city of York. You can look at York as a historic city, or you can look at York as an innovation playground. Just imagine the stories that you can tell, what's happened, and some of the stories we heard this morning that our digital creatives can now tell about the city of York. Is there a better place in the world, a better playground, if you're in that industry, with which to grow your business? So you've got a city which is steeped in kind of good principles, in social well-being, and you've got these incredible stories that you can tell. So we want to position York and North Yorkshire as the heartbeat of that, of digital and creative technology, to really drive some of those opportunities going forwards. But we also want to position York and North Yorkshire to make the most of its natural assets around the bioeconomy, around the future of food. Food and energy security are 2 of the biggest global challenges. And they're 2 of the biggest global challenges where the answers, or many of those answers, can lie in York and North Yorkshire. So by following sustainable business practices, by looking at our natural assets as a real innovation opportunity in what we can do, that is what the future of our economy will look like. And it won't just make York and North Yorkshire successful, it will make the whole of the UK successful on a global scale. And so we think we have a really distinctive place in our region, in our country, as York and North Yorkshire. We think we're very different to West Yorkshire and to Manchester and the West Midlands, because we have assets that they don't have, and we have a capability that they don't have. Now, we understand that to take advantage of that, as a combined authority, we are just an enabler. So the Mayor and our team, we're just there to enable it. The ideas, the solutions, they will come from you. They will come from the private sector and that partnership with the university. And we've already heard today, we heard Kieran talk about the importance of action. And I want to see that action out of it. So my message today is enjoy today. I think it's really, really important. It's fundamental to the future well-being of the whole of the York and North Yorkshire economy. It's what makes us different, and it's how we're going to position ourselves for the future. But the outcome of today has got to be action. It has got to be, what are those opportunities for York and North Yorkshire? What are the opportunities that we can get together, we can collaborate, and we can make happen? And how, if we all follow good business practices, if we all follow the sustainability agenda, how do we create that opportunity to really drive new opportunities for businesses and for people across the region? And if that can be the outcome from today, my promise to you is that we'll get behind you, we'll back it, and we'll help make sure it happens, and we'll put it at the heart of our plans. So please use today as a stimulus, use today as not just an opportunity to have good conversations, but use today as the platform of the opportunity to come away with some very clear actions that can make York and North Yorkshire the absolute best playground in the whole of the world for good business and sustainable business practices. And that's what I'd like to see as the outcome when we get to the end of today. Thank you.
Wow. So you know, that's all four speakers together have created so much optimism and a way forward, and that power of working the universities, working with business, working with the combined mayoral authority, working on natural assets and innovation. It's just fantastic. Thanks for being very motivational. You really motivated everybody in the room, James, and the other speakers as well. So much common ground and chiming together, which is fantastic. What people forget about York and North Yorkshire is the size of the geographical landscape, all the way over to nearly to Lancaster and Burnley in the west, all the way up nearly to Barnard Castle, which was famous for other reasons in recent times, and also all the way across to Scarborough on the coastal area. So it is a fantastic region to deliver all those ideas, and that's no pressure there then for this group today. Thank you, everybody. Great start to the day. We're going to move into our first panel soon, and Jacqueline's going to say a few words about that. But what a way to start. Thank you very much, all four speakers. You've been fantastic and really set the scene and the tone for the day. Thank you.
Thank you to our keynote speakers for their inspiring speeches, which provide the foundation for our panel discussing to come. So, because we're running a little bit out of time, so it's my pleasure to introduce our first panel, Responsible Business. This session will examine the social dimensions of responsible and ethical business practices. Let's welcome our distinguished speakers and chairs to the stage.
I'm Nicholas Pleece. I'm Associate Dean for Research and Impact at the School for Business and Society. I am not going to talk very much because we need to make up the time in this session. But what I'm going to do is just quickly introduce our panel of speakers. I won't introduce Bob because you've already met Bob. But I'm delighted to introduce Katie, who's Head of Responsible Business at TSB, Jenny, who I've been working with for some time, who's CEO at the Good Business Charter, and also Jack, who's Social Impact and Sustainability Manager for Aviva. Bob, you've spearheaded several high-profile innovative projects, including Fix Our Food, while at the same time serving as the founding dean for the School for Business and Society. I'd like you to talk a bit about what's inspired you to follow this path and how you define responsible business.
I guess my inspirations really come initially from my grandparents. So my grandparents on my father's side were miners and cotton mill workers who were very, very strong union representatives in Burnley. And on the other side, my mother's side, she was a farmer's daughter. So my granddad was a farmer, very, very good business person, but my interest in fairness and also in responsible business is a kind of a hybrid between the views of both my grandparents. And that's what I've always done. I've always worked originally, before entering academia, in the fair trade sector, establishing Divine Chocolate, being a campaigner for Oxfam. So my definition of responsible business has to be that they have to have a positive social and environmental impact on communities. You know, James talked about thriving communities, thriving healthy communities, and I'm a great believer in that. And business is integrated with society. It's not separate. Some economists would like to see business separate from society, you know, externalizing its costs, you know, extracting from the natural environment and from people. But actually, that's not going to work long term. We have to be integrated. Businesses have to be integrated with society. So fairness has always been part of my DNA, and tackling complex societal challenges. That's why I'm so glad I'm the founder of the School for Business and Society, because we're the only school, academic school in the United Kingdom, called the School for Business and Society. The only one. You know, our competitors are Warwick Business School, Manchester Business School. They take a very, very different approach to business. And so we're very unique in that respect. And that's what really drives me on.
So the next question for Katie. So Katie, you're the head of responsible business in one of the leading retail banks in the UK. So I'd just like to ask you, what's your perspective on responsible business?
Yeah, so just a quick, so TSB, we're a medium-sized retail bank, and what that means is we serve around about 5 million customers in England, Wales and Scotland, and we're pretty much straightforward. You know, we attract savings, and then we use that savings to help ordinary people kind of buy their homes or to go about their lives. We are rooted in social good, so we have a heritage that goes back to 1810 when the Reverend Henry Duncan was the founder of the savings bank movement. And what that basically means is that he enabled everyday people to access banking services in a time where it was only for the very wealthy or the elite. If you fast forward that to today, responsible business at TSB is really about how we deliver our social initiatives alongside our environmental initiatives, but also maintaining kind of the essentials of responsible business. We kind of came about responsible business slightly by accident, and I think that does happen in businesses from time to time. So in 2019, I picked up a role that was sitting in a corporate affairs function, which was all about building reputation for the business. But I was challenged with very few resources, so I had to really take a close, hard look at the things that I really wanted to concentrate on. So I commissioned some research to understand what our customers and our stakeholders and our colleagues thought about what we already did, what they thought about other businesses that they would actually recommend and, you know, would advocate for. And what came back at me, unsurprisingly, was that, yeah, you have to do good things in your community, but you also need to make sure you're paying your taxes and being a good corporate citizen. You have to look after your people, you know, give them a fair wage, fair hours, and so on. You need to do right by the planet, but you also need to play your part in the supply chain. And it was a real aha moment for me, because I was able to look across the business and say, well, we already do some of that stuff, but some of it sits in HR, some of it sits over there, some of it sits over there, you know, but there was a gap. You know, we weren't great on environmental stuff. And so what I did is I created a narrative to hang this from, something called the Do What Matters plan, which is really our responsible business strategy. If you fast forward to today, that responsible business strategy is focused on delivering 8 goals around people and planet that collectively drive social and financial inclusion, promote fair business practice, and support a just transition to a greener planet. And that's simply what we do. One final thing on responsible business. The positive thing about once you start on a responsible business journey is that it's very difficult for people to wriggle out of. So there are many conversations that I have with very senior people where there are priority calls being made. Oh, should we be doing that? Yeah, absolutely we should, because I persuaded you to make a commitment. And if you go back on the commitment in today's environment, that isn't a good thing to do from a reputational perspective. So I'm unashamedly holding my business to account and using our commitments to do good.
So, Jenny, you launched the Good Business Charter. We've had the Good Business Charter explained to us a couple of times, so we won't go into too much detail now. But could you please share your insights into what motivated you to pursue the path of working for GBC, and how is responsible business reflected and promoted by the GBC framework?
Yes, of course. Thank you for all those who've already explained what the Good Business Charter is. We have bookmarks you can pick up and take away, which also set out our 10. My background, I'm an auditor by trade, but my background has always been in charities, and spent some time overseas where I saw poverty sort of overseas, what that looks like. And of course, then the impact that we have here of UK businesses, ethical sourcing, if they're not thinking about that, the kind of child labour in Guatemala was where I lived, and there are companies today still using child labour in countries like Guatemala. But when I came back to Britain, I realised the sort of poverty that exists here, and had the good fortune of meeting Julian when he set up a charity that was helping people in UK poverty who can't buy essential items like a washing machine, like a bus fare, like school uniform. And just really understanding the flip side, the people at the end of low paid, insecure work. And so when Julian started to talk to me about the Good Business Charter, it was really seeing particularly the focus on that if all companies in this country were treating their people properly, where they were really caring for them, they were paying them right, they were giving them secure work that they could actually budget on. There are obviously other wider issues like housing challenges, but actually it would make a big impact. And I think, you know, we're all seeing some of the issues with inequality and how that's widening. So what's drawn me in particular is that side of things, both the people in the UK and people down the ethical sourcing chain. But actually that's why the Good Business Charter, I think we would say that essentially it's about doing to others what you would have do to you. You want to be paid on time, you want to be treated fairly, you want to be cared for, and why do we then not do that for others? So I think that's been our mantra. And so therefore, even with the environment, when we approach the environment, we talk about future generations. It's about having that framework that we are caring for our generations for the future, but also looking after people today and kind of using that framework. And as I've worked for the Good Business Charter over the last few years, there hasn't really been anyone who said, you've totally forgotten this area. You know, it was 10 that were put together. There are things you can expand on, certainly within the tax. You could widen that more around society, but it does feel like a framework that's captured the key fundamentals.
So, in your role as a social impact and sustainability manager for Aviva, how do you observe responsible and ethical business practices being implemented? And if you could give us a couple of examples, that would be great. Thank you.
Yeah, definitely. So first of all, I think when we talk about responsible business, it's not a new thing and especially not for Aviva. You know, we've been doing it for 300 odd years, and it's really part of the fabric of how we operate as an organisation. You know, if insurance at its core, you know, if you're struggling with your health, if you get into a car accident, Aviva's there to look after you, and that's what core responsible business is for us. Is looking after both people internally, but externally as well to our customers. And you know, about a third of the UK is Aviva customer, so we have an obligation there to support people. But then also standing up in our community. So if I take the part, you know, retaining your staff and making sure they're happy workforce is a win-win, because ultimately we have 25,000 people that work for Aviva in the UK nationally. if they're happy and motivated to come to work, then that means that, you know, they will do good work, right? You know, and but that's also in our interest because we're looking after our people. And we do that really, really well. I'm obviously biased at Aviva because I work there, but I've only been here for a year, so I can go on a bit more objectivity. But people really work at Aviva for a long time. You know, lots of people that I'm sitting next to the office is about 20, 25 years that they've been here. And that's because of the things that we implement internally. So a couple of examples, you know, we have 35 hours of carer leave. So if you've got a caring responsibility, you can take that as paid. That's we have other things like volunteering leave. But then I think when we're talking about the core principles, being a living wage employer, really crucial, and we're really key part of that. But we've just launched something called the living pension as well, where it's kind of putting a minimum of 12% into your pension pot. That is kind of allowing you to retire comfortably for your future. And then if we think about the external part, so how we're standing up in our community, we've got kind of the large-scale investment piece. So we've got about 10 billion since October 2020 into kind of UK infrastructure and housing, which is how we're standing up in the UK and making sure that we're developing it. But then also from kind of a local community point of view as well. So a really good example is the work that we're doing with the university actually with Place, which is a place in Chapel Fields or Westfield, however you want to define that area, which is a local community centre, and we're developing an employability programme for young people from that area. Young people from there don't even identify themselves as part of York. You know, they call them from Chapel Fields. They don't look outwards. And so their kind of life chances are really, you know, we've got generational of unemployment in that area. So, you know, that cycle deprivation just goes on and on. So we're thinking about, okay, that is right on our doorstep, and people coming to work at Aviva don't even know that's happening. So if that's right on our doorstep, we need to make sure that that's not the case, and how can we improve the life chances of those people that we're serving locally as well. So it's that mixture of, you know, the large scale to the local community and that internal and external as well. Yeah.
We've had the kind of opening questions, now we're getting into the more difficult stuff, which is what are the challenges for your organisations around delivering a responsible business model? And how do you overcome those challenges? And in thinking about that, I'm thinking about evidence that some corporations, some big businesses are backing away from ESG. We've obviously got particular issues around the political landscape, North America and Europe, and how that's changing. I wondered if you had any thoughts about the future of responsible business in that kind of context.
Should I start? Yeah. For us in Aviva, I think the challenge is to be truly needs-led. So rather than being someone at an organisation that goes, oh, I think X is really important, and then I have a bit of money to play with, I'm going to give this to an organisation, and then they either leave or the organisation's priorities change, and then before you know it, over a 10 or 15 year period, you've had 3 years added onto each other of various bits and bobs that you've kind of done a patchwork quilt that's actually made not any long-term transformative change or impact. And so I think what a challenge is, and what we're trying to do and overcome that challenge, is thinking about, okay, what is the evidence base? You know, York and will have a really different need to somewhere like Leeds or Manchester or places in London. The evidence base is different. The people are different, right? So you have to think about, okay, what is the need in the location? What is the evidence? What does the data say? And then you do your activity on the basis of that in collaboration with other organisations. And that's what we're trying to do. So we partnered with an organisation called Business in the Community to do this, to stand up this kind of place-based model. And this is what place means to us, to do kind of needs-led community impact and community investment. We've got ambition to them to get to 50 places by 2032, and York is one of them for us. And we're on about 13 or 14, I can't remember. So we've got a long way to go. But it's looking at, I think a challenge in responsible business is being that needs-led, but also then it's also that opportunity as well. Because if you are truly needs-led, then your activity is kind of unequivocal, right? You're doing it because you can't really argue that we should be doing employability stuff in York, because the disparity of outcome and dependent award is massive, right? If you're in from a certain area in York, your life chances are very different. If you're in Chapel Fields, you have to, and you're post-16, you have to go outside of Chapel Fields to go to post-16 college, right? So how we can increase employability in York is a really key thing. No one can argue with that because it's data-driven. So I think that is really important, but it's a challenge because convincing people that's the way to go internally is tough sometimes, but it's also a really good opportunity.
So I'm representing smaller businesses today. We're a charity of 6, and I think for small businesses, when you look at the challenges of responsible business, it is most small businesses set up with, particularly with the entrepreneur work we've done with Sam, and entrepreneurs set up wanting to be responsible. As they grow a bit, they keep being responsible. Often the things that then cause them trouble are the fact that not everyone in their ecosystem is being responsible. So, for example, they want to pay promptly, but they are not being paid promptly by big companies, and that's therefore putting them in a really difficult situation. They come to us and say, we want to accredit, but we can't always pay promptly, but it's because of this, and that feels very unfair for them. And I think another area is perhaps when they're looking at their sourcing, but small businesses don't have the kind of buying power, purchasing power that they can really demand their suppliers to change. So it's really good news for small businesses in York to be part of a city that's really championing, and hopefully a whole region, as we heard, that's going to champion good business practices, because that helps the small businesses because they're doing what they can. And we've partnered with the Federation of Small Businesses because they are behind what we're doing as well, because small businesses really care about this. But the challenges are often coming from external factors, I would say.
Thank you. So for TSB, we're a little bit kind of later on our journey than Aviva. So I think the real challenge we face is around embedding responsible business. So, I mean, I've got a job and I've got a team, so you could kind of say the business has made some commitment. They've put something out externally. But when you really scratch, and I mean really, really scratch below the surface, there are still people in my organisation, quite influential people in my organisation, who deny that we need to do it or will argue about a target. So for me, what I think comes down from that is a level of competence and understanding, and then confidence to take action. So when you look at a typical kind of big business, it's run by people who've been in business for quite a long time. And I'm not saying that all people who've been in business for a long time, have kind of fixed views, but, the world is changing at quite a scary pace, and there are other things that are coming, whether it's AI or whatever. These things are really kind of challenging the mindsets of our boards and our executive teams. So for me, that's a real present challenge that I'm facing into. One way of getting around that is to bring as many external voices in to kind of hold the mirror up to your business. So since the beginning of this year, I've had an advisory board. So this is a panel of external experts, one from academia, one from kind of very pragmatic, deliverable sustainability activities, and another that's really focused on financial inclusion, which is very relevant, obviously, to us in banking. And, we've had 4 or 5 sessions so far, and the difference that I get from, some of those that I would call deniers, probably not to their faces, but, some of those people have just been sitting and having a longer conversation that's really focused has helped to kind of shift the dial. So that's the reality for me.
So I'm a head of an academic department, so an academic school, deliver social and environmental change. You may have seen this example on BBC News last Tuesday on BBC Breakfast, but I work on food systems, and I've been doing, my team, some of them are here, I've been doing a lot of work on school food, and we've been piloting an action-orientated intervention around free school meals. So we actually discovered that about 470,000 families in the UK are eligible for free school meals. Remember, the threshold's only 7,000 £400 in terms of combined income, eligible for free school meals, but actually weren't applying for free school meals. For whatever reason, they were eligible, but they weren't applying. So we've done what's called auto-enrollment. We brought two databases together. We navigated GDPR problems. We brought the universal credit database together with council tax relief. And basically, we auto-enroll. We've been working with 60 local authorities now, and we've auto-enrolled 20,000 children to get a free school meal for the first time. And that's what research can have that impact if it's action-orientated.
So we've talked about challenges. What about opportunities? What do you see based on your practice and observation in responsible business and also responsible research in terms of what the university does that can lead to sustainable development, to sustainable activity? Where do you think the opportunities are? Are there spaces we've not explored yet in terms of responsible business and activity?
When we established Divine Chocolate, which is a fair trade pioneer, we didn't establish it to sell loads of chocolate. We established it to solve some of the problems Jenny was talking about in supply chains. You know, child labour is a real problem in cocoa, and so is exploitation in terms of price, and you've seen that more recently as well. So we didn't join. We didn't. You know, I never really had the motivation to sell loads of chocolate. I just wanted to develop a business model that did good, that changed the market. So when we set up Divine Chocolate in 1998, and we did it with a big event in the Great Club in London, and Ben Elton was our keynote speaker, at that time, only 0.1% of the UK chocolate market was certified cocoa. So there was a bit from Divine Chocolate, a bit from Green and Blacks, and the rest of it didn't even acknowledge on the product label where cocoa came from. Didn't even say sourced from Ghana or the Ivory Coast or whatever. Fast forward to 2007, 40% of the UK chocolate market was certified. So Divine Chocolate shined a light on the problem, and we were very good at advocacy and policy impact. So we did a lot of advocacy work. We worked with campaign groups around cocoa. We worked in Parliament. We worked all the way with activist York, which is a fair trade city. We worked very, very closely with the fair trade group in York. And basically, we changed the market. You know, we changed the market, you know, within a, 10-year period. And that's what business can do. It's got to find a problem, though. You know, finding a problem, finding something to solve. And there's lots of problems out there that I think that business can solve. And there are great examples. I work in the food system. There's some great examples in Yorkshire and beyond about companies, changing the way that markets work, changing the way that farming works. There's so many opportunities.
In 2018, we had a fairly challenging time where we did an IT migration that went catastrophically wrong for our customers. Now, I'm pleased to say we're kind of recovered, but, the impact of that, something awful, something really good came out of it. And the thing that was good that came out of it is when you've created instability and uncertainty for your customers around their money, the fraudsters start to circle around and they start to say, well, everybody's feeling a bit insecure if they're a TSB customer. Let's see if we can persuade them to send their life savings to us. And, true to form, 3 weeks after the migration event had failed, we saw significant amounts of fraud on our customers' account. Now, there was a whole load of debate going on about, should we be asking our customers to evidence and prove that, that they've not given their PIN numbers or sent them money. And ultimately, we made the call that, we're the ones that have created this mess. We've created this uncertainty. We need to own it. And actually, we're just going to give customers the money back. Now, it's a very brave thing to do in business to say, we'll just give the customers the money back. But what we found from doing that was, firstly, it helped our customers. Secondly, it actually cost us less, weirdly, to give the money back than to do the long, convoluted chasing down of evidencing everything. But it also gave us an opportunity to campaign and to, pick up with policymakers to say, we can do this, we can make ends meet with it. Other businesses and other banks can do the same. And on the 7th of October this year, legislation came in that meant that every UK bank, if you are a victim of push payment fraud, you're entitled to your money back. Now, there are some limitations to that. I mean, we've argued that you should have more, but it's definitely a step forward. So it just shows you, out of adversity, if you've got the right mindset, you can create something that's really good and impactful.
Thanks. It's really exciting to hear all that Fair Trade really achieved in a relatively short space of time. We have similar huge ambitions for the GBC. Ultimately, the Good Business Charter isn't about here's a small group of niche businesses who are the good guys. It's about making that the benchmark, the entry point to do business in the UK, so that we get to a point where if you can't do these 10, you shouldn't be doing business here at all. That may seem a long way to go, but actually, obviously now with the current government, there's a lot of plans in place. The Procurement Act, looking at how we can, wouldn't it be great if government were only procuring to responsible businesses? Wouldn't it be great if tax credits were only going to the responsible businesses that are already paying their tax? They're fairly basic asks. And so really it's about that opportunity to get lots and lots of momentum behind certain places, certain communities, key businesses. You've got a third of the customers have got some contact with Aviva. There's actually, as we pull things together, we know this is what customers want. We know this is what workers want, especially younger workers as they come in. They really care about what their employer thinks about ESG, about environmental and social and governance issues. And so I think there's a lot of opportunities also, of course, in the investment space. That is one where, again, if we can look at moving away from this language of woke and just being a responsible business, doing the right things, and then asking investors to then be investing in those responsible businesses, you can, there's that real opportunity to drive all business behaviour up. We're already seeing it with individual businesses who are doing 7 or 8 of our 10 and are actually changing behaviour to accredit with us. That's what we want. That's what we want to see happening, and that's where the opportunity lies.
I think for us, opportunity is the key opportunity is collaboration. So what a lot of responsible business teams at large business or even medium-sized small businesses, they'll create a responsible business strategy or whatever, it's sustainability strategy, and it all looks good on a piece of paper. We're going to do X, Y, and Z, and we're going to support this organization and do this project, and it's all going to be great in 5-10 years' time. And the problem is that they all do it alone. And so each big business will, or any business, will all have their own individual projects and plans and things, and it doesn't really fit together. The puzzle pieces don't make an overall community better. And so what happens is that in some areas it's really great, and then in others it gets neglected. And so what is an opportunity for responsible business and future responsible business practices is organizations to come together and say, we're all pretty much singing from the same hymn sheet here. We all want development for local communities or sustainable futures for the places that we operate. Let's work together to come up with an agenda for the place, but not just businesses, but how can we bring in combined authorities, councils, voluntary sector to kind of convene at that sweet point in the middle, because our collective power together can make a bigger difference. And we're trying to do that. We've got something called the Pride of Place Board in York, and Kieran chairs it, and we're doing that with the university to bring together all these kind of different members of and organisations in the city, so that we are doing joined up collaborative action that is going to make bigger difference for communities that need it most, rather than just all us doing it individually.
If we could have anybody who's got any questions.
Hello, I'm Rose. I've no experience of business, but I just want to give you an example that happened today. I travel frequently between Amsterdam and York, and because of my principles, I take the train. I bought a ticket today. I was a bit shocked at the price, and the extremely helpful lady at York Ticket Office said, "Oh, wouldn't you be better flying?" And what I'm trying to say is there must be lobbyists for the flying industry, this is just an example, who somehow are managing to make flying cheaper than travelling by train, which, of course, is better for the environment. So how do you deal with lobbyists?
Hi everyone, thanks. My name's Sam Gardner, I'm Director of Enterprise Works at the University of York. I want to ask the panel a question about the role of procurement in all of this activity. There's an enormous opportunity here for both small businesses to benefit from supply chains, and in our case we're particularly interested around supporting social enterprises in supply chains, but also for businesses to do a tremendous amount of good through that supply chain and through that procurement process. I'd be really interested to hear how we can do that better collectively.
Hello, my name's Barbara Saunders. I'm involved in the communications industry. I think what we're hearing altogether, if you join everything up, is a movement. But I was very interested in what Kate said, that some of the input has to come from external influences. And so my view is, what are you doing to make consumers aware and to start consumers asking for businesses to do good?
A number of people today have mentioned campaigning and advocacy. I think you can combat the kind of private sector lobbying, which does take place, took place a lot over the previous government. You can do it by good campaigning and good advocacy work. There's so many examples of that within housing, within the area I work in, food. I'm not a transport expert, so. But I think that's one way of dealing with it. In terms of procurement, I completely agree. We in the research program I work in, which is called Fix Our Food, we've been doing a lot of work on public food procurement and trying to also work with our university caterers to change the way that they procure. So we set up a supplier hub of sustainable farmers and sustainable food businesses that provide different categories, and now our catering team are procuring through them. It's a trial, it's a pilot, so I'm hoping that will work. In terms of, what was the other question, sorry? Oh yeah, consumers, fantastic question. When I was at Divine Chocolate, we did enormous amount of work in getting our product stocked in retailers. That was difficult, and you only could do it by mobilizing campaigners to go to the supermarket, write letters to Tesco's and Sainsbury's, say, will you stock Divine Chocolate? And we did that through very, very effective campaign groups like Oxfam, Christian Aid, CAFOD, Women's Institute. You've got to collaborate with organisations to do it. Thank you.
Okay, so again, nothing to do with trains, I think, but I think my previous point around lobbying and campaigning it's a real force for good. We've got examples not only in the fraud space, but we've done a lot of work in domestic abuse and really driving that agenda because of the link to financial abuse. In terms of the supply chain, so for TSB, whilst we're a fairly biggish sized organization, interestingly, our number of suppliers is quite small. And we spend the majority of our money with very big providers, the BTs and the Microsoft, those kind of people. And so actually we find that we piggyback off them. So we're learning from our big suppliers. Now we pay that forward with our smaller suppliers. And specifically how we do that is around focusing our procurement processes around prompt payment. So we have a laser-like focus on our smaller businesses. We aim to pay small businesses within 10 days. We've had a bit of a hit actually, interestingly, this year because we've had some changes in personnel. But testament to the Good Business Charter, we've all sat there and gone, we're at risk here if we don't do something, and everybody's pulled their socks up. So it's looking much more positive. In terms of helping customers, right? This is a real challenge for us, I think. An area that we are really grappling with at the moment is around how we drive changes in the housing market in terms of sustainability of UK homes. So 99% of our carbon emissions from TSB are in the homes that we lend money for our customers to buy. Right, so not many customers think that it's any of our business why they're, whether they've got a heat source pump or, the emissions that are coming out of their homes. And so the tactic that we're deploying with that is very much around raising awareness, because you have to raise that awareness before, and then coming up with a proposition that supports that awareness, and then really driving that. But it requires not just TSB, it requires, the media to be talking about it, your next door neighbour to be doing something to really shift it. So I think it's a collaboration point to really drive that awareness.
For us, the consumer piece is huge. That's really where we started looking at retail, and that's probably the one where you've got the most extreme situation where a lot of consumers want to buy from responsible retailers, responsible supermarkets. The reality is they are very hard pressed on finance, and therefore, even though they know this shop down the road is going to be a better business, it is possibly double the price of the terrible business that they know about and they've read about, but it's cheaper, and that is a massive challenge. That said, we're working with Which, working with the ethical consumer. It is about collaborating with those different groups to try and raise awareness and keep driving that message, and hope that over time that demand on consumers does get less, or more importantly, we push those businesses that are behaving badly to sort themselves out so that we can get there. But that is a very real challenge. When we've talked to businesses, we've tended to focus more on your workforce, because big businesses are struggling to retain and recruit good workers, because we know that the consumer one is just a struggle because of the challenges on them. In terms of procurement, I'd just say that is certainly an area. Again, we would love to have we'd love a supermarket to be accredited with a Good Business Charter, and then work with them in detail to go down their supply chain, look at how we can drive procurement, continue talking to the council here. How can City of York Council favour the responsible businesses through their procurement, and obviously feeding into the debate at the top as well with national government to look at how we can drive procurement, because that would make a real impact.
Okay, three great questions. I think starting with the lobbying one, I think it's always going to be the case where you have forces for that will be in opposition to responsible business practices. There's a whole host of people that will still advocate for shareholder primacy. They will still advocate for practices that go against everything that we're saying today. I think all you can do as a responsible business and organisation is advocate for positive change and prove that impact. Beyond just being kind of altruistic and the right thing to do, but actually proving that it makes really good business sense as well. The 3 Ps of people, planet, profit, they're actually intertwined and support each other. And if you don't focus on all 3 in tandem and only focus on one, then the other 2 will then inevitably decline. So that's a really important point. Next is supply chain. Thanks for the question, Sam. I think it's difficult from an Aviva perspective, I think, because we're beholden to large scale kind of national contracts, and then getting that kind of local supply chain point is difficult, but not impossible. And I think it's really important because ultimately, there's lots of evidence if you support local and organisation supply chain, it builds community wealth really quickly and really brilliantly. So that's a question and a task that I'm definitely taking internally, but it's supply chain more generally. I think it's, again, looking at the Good Business Charter, is advocating that your suppliers have to be aligned to the values that you, as yourself as an organisation, a good example is Aviva. All our suppliers have to adhere to science-based targets for the sustainability, right? So if they don't do that, then there's a period of time that eventually they won't be a supplier of Aviva. We're forcing change through what we're saying that our suppliers have to meet kind of the standards. And then the final one, the consumer, I think, again, from a V perspective, super important. Our slogan is with you today for a better tomorrow. And it might sound a little bit corny, but it's actually really kind of important and integrated into everything that we do. The consumer informs our practices, so we make sure that we have a huge amount of data-driven, consumer-informed practices. What I mean by that is that we often go out to kind of doing surveys and things like that to get an impression of how we operate in the community, but also what our customers want us to do in the future, and that informs our strategy as well. So that's super important. And not just considering that we're doing stuff to people and to our consumers, but we're doing them in collaboration and with, so they're a really important and key stakeholder. Yeah.
So I think if I was going to take a message from this first panel, it's about the possibility of change and how change can happen. I mean, you know, the question about the trains, yes, the forces that are ranged against responsible business, against ethical business, sustainable business are very considerable. I mean, living in York, you know, one of our main products in this city is history. I mean, I think there are important lessons from history. Look at the vast mercantile interests that were behind slavery, behind big tobacco. You know, one's gone, one's in serious retreat. And look what's starting to happen around fossil fuel and renewables. The UK has just closed its last coal-powered power station. So change is possible. We've heard a lot today about how that can be delivered on a practical level. I'd like to thank the panellists very, very much, and please give them a round of applause.
Thank you very much, all. I will lead off on the supply chain, the sustainable supply chain session, but I will quickly move over to our wonderful panelists and get insights from them before I ask them some questions and then hand over the questions to you. Disregarding anybody else in the room, Jacqueline's been really kind to me because she's lined everyone up in order on the screen in the program and here as well. So it helps with my confusion. So my name is Peter Ball. I'm a professor of operations management at the University of York, and I've been given the honor of chairing this session. And I'd like to say a couple of words initially before I hand over to the panel members. They'll introduce themselves and they will give us some insight into what they're doing on sustainable supply chains. I had to smile, and I think Kevin will follow on from me on this, that from the very start of the session, including the Lord Mayor saying she doesn't know anything about the session and the subject area, and then started talking about people and businesses and transportation, and others then followed on. And so there's already a theme of supply chain that has been emerging in this session, and we want to delve more deeply into it. So I'll make give you a quick overview once again of what we're going to do. We'll get some questions at the very end, and like in the last session, we'll ask all the questions first, and then give the panelists time to think about them and try and put some of them together in their answers. So I want to get out of your way, everyone, and hand over to Kevin. Kevin, can you introduce yourself and say a bit more about what your understanding of supply chains is?
Thanks, and morning, everyone. So my name is Kevin McCann. I work for Next Energy Group. We are fundamentally an investor in utility-scale power plants, specifically solar farms and grid-scale energy storage. So big batteries, basically. And we've also got a development arm and an asset management arm. So what I mean by that is we do greenfield development of new projects, and we invest in, buy, own and operate existing projects. And we also look after the day-to-day management of those power plants to making them working as efficiently as possible and generating as much clean energy as possible for the grid. As part of my day job, a large part of what I'm involved in is supporting our procurement team to ensure responsible sourcing. We are, as I say, primarily an investment management firm, and what that means is that we really sit in the middle of the people we're buying from and the areas in which we are constructing our power plants. So our impact as a business, as much as anything, is the upstream impact of our suppliers, so the companies who are manufacturing the components in which we're investing and the plant and machinery in which we're investing, and also the downstream impact of where we're building our plants, how we interact with local communities, with the local environment, and further down the line, what happens to all that plant and machinery when these assets get to the end of their operational life, and how and in what fashion they get decommissioned. So I suppose just a couple of brief things really in terms of, one is that point about really understanding where you sit in the value chain, which is the point I've already made about our impact is the impact of the people we're buying from. And so we're engaged in a lot of work at the moment around what we call traceability, so understanding the raw material inputs of the products we're buying, right back up to the very beginning of any supply chain, which fundamentally usually starts with a mining company extracting things from the ground. And that's true for every piece of equipment in this room. So we're doing a lot of work looking at that. We are also, there was a comment made by Jack, I think, from Aviva in the previous session about the importance of moving as one where possible as an industry. And I think that's a really perceptive comment because we're a big buyer by sort of renewable energy standards, but by the standards of, perhaps the consumer electronics industry, we're not as big. So I think what's really important is, even though we are, of course, competing as individual businesses, is to seek to collaborate where possible, because that's what drives the development of market mechanisms that can bring about change. And speaking from direct personal experience, we've really seen supply chain diversification happening over the last 2 or 3 years in the solar industry in particular, and that's, it's been phenomenal to watch that happen in real time. And then finally, the last thing I'd say at this stage is that perfection is not that it's unattainable, but that nothing happens overnight. Supply chains are formidably complex. They involve, of course, a huge range of legal, technical, financial, logistical impacts, which are a function of, politics and social events happening all over the world. And so I think it's an iterative process. It's always about trying to improve on what you're already doing, with a clear understanding of what the risks and opportunities are in your particular sector, and as I say, trying to improve over time and taking it one step at a time, really.
Hello, my name's Astrid. I work for a company called TechBuyer. TechBuyer sits right in the middle of a global supply chain. So we buy, we refurbish, and we sell data center equipment predominantly. That's servers, storage, and networking. And what that means is that our operations has multiple supply chains. So we've got the supply chain of new, which has its own issues in terms of questioning and how we're doing on that. We have a refurbished supply chain, which means that we have questions to ask of our secondary market suppliers, which might be slightly different. We've got how we deliver to customers downstream and the best value on that, and how to extend product life, on how to minimize materials and energy usage within that product life. And then we've got a reverse supply chain. So we buy equipment back from customers, which I guess is a third supply chain. And then the reverse supply chain of what happens at end of life and what are your risks there. So that's kind of where we sit. And alongside, or because of where we sit, we have to understand the ecosystem probably more than other companies. And the data on that particular ecosystem is lacking. So we've worked a lot with research organizations across Europe to try and establish what the materials content of servers, storage, and networking is, and therefore what the mining impact of that is, how you can design for circularity, how you can make a business case for refurbishment, and how you can improve your recycling technologies. It leads us to have partnerships with higher value recyclers, which means that there's a business trade-off. So we try and allocate a portion of our business at end of life to bioleaching, for example, which at the moment is in its nascent stages. So what are the benefits of that, and what reporting do you ask from your downstream supply chain to make sure that what you're doing is a responsible investment of your money and your business, and is it generating the returns that you want? And then also, we work a lot in trade, and when you work in trade, you're very, very conscious of the global supply chain and the restrictions in the global supply chain. So we saw that in COVID. I think we're probably going to see that again going forwards with the rise of AI, because there's not enough energy in production at the moment to sustain AI in the way that it looks like it's going, and there's going to be a materials issue as well. So there's kind of these global issues that touch upon our relatively small business.
Thank you, Astrid. Over to Katie.
Good morning, everyone. My name's Katie, and I work for Jet2.com and Jet2 Holidays. We are the UK's largest tour operator and also the UK's third largest airline. So we have an exceptionally diverse supply chain across multiple geographies. So it's a really big challenge for us. And when it comes to sustainability for my industry, the focus is very much on climate change. I know there's a lady in the audience earlier, I think Rose, you mentioned the choice between train and rail travel, air travel. It might surprise you to know that aviation accounts for 2 to 3% of emissions globally, so it is a small proportion. However, we are an incredibly challenging sector to decarbonise. So we don't have electric aircraft, we don't have hydrogen-powered aircraft currently. The technology is just not currently there at a commercial scale. The next best solution we have is looking at alternative fuels, so lower carbon sustainable aviation fuels. However, there's not many SAF sustainable aviation fuels in supply currently, so it will take time for that technology to ramp up. So when it comes to supply chain, I think this is an area for the aviation and travel industry where we can make genuine impact today. So when we launched our sustainability strategy earlier this year, we, for the first time, monitored our Scope 3 emissions, so the emissions from our supply chain. And we found that a significant proportion of our emissions come from our customer hotel stays, so the hotels that we sell alongside our package holidays. We currently contract with over 6,000 hotels in 70 sun, ski and city destinations, so a huge supply chain. And a very diverse supply chain in terms of the size. We work with large hotel chains down to the very small boutique hotels. So for us, the challenge is bringing them on the journey with us and making sure that it's equitable as well, so that all of our business partners are able to decarbonise and enhance their sustainability performance. And the way we do that is through a focus on hotel sustainability certification. So late last year, we launched our Certified Sustainable Hotels collection. This is a collection of hotels that meet a standard for sustainability. So they've been certified as taking action in the areas of energy reduction, emission accounting, conservation of local heritage, social value, so providing a great place to work and supporting their colleagues. And these standards are recognised by the Global Sustainable Tourism Council, the GSTC. We currently have 1,200 hotels in this collection, and we have a target to have 3,000 hotels in this collection by 2035. So certification for us is a really great way of pushing forward the sustainability agenda. But we also understand that it's expensive for some of our suppliers. So it's really important that we work with them to take them on this journey. And the way we have done that is through partnering with a well-known hotel sustainability standard called Green Key. And through our relationship with Green Key, we offer our hotels a discount so then they can work towards certification.
Hello, I'm Lloyd Atkin. I'm the MD of a company called BioD. We manufacture sustainable cleaning products. Sat here this morning, I guess, when I was originally asked to do this, I thought we're a very small business. It's very difficult for us to affect supply chains, especially upstream. But then, having sat and listened to some people around here, I think I'm in the fortunate position that we were a kind of purpose-driven business from day one. So everything we do has sustainability steeped in it, and we're not trying to change the world internally. So we focus because of that. People have said earlier on, your upstream supply chains are very difficult as a small business to affect. So we affect what we can, and we do our best with our kind of downstream supply chains, which, we're cleaning products, predominantly liquid products. We do use plastics because, we've done research with the likes of the University of York. Plastic is a very durable, reusable, and safe way to transport liquids. So we actually work on closed loop in our downstream supply chain, ensuring that we're making it as easy as possible for consumers to reuse the products we put into the marketplace. So we use 100% post-consumer recycled plastics. I believe we were the first in the UK to do that. And across all of our consumer-sized products, we also have 20-litre refill drums which go into the supply chain, and now retailers can send those back to us very easily. We pay for it, we launder them. We've done the calculations again with the help of the University of York to ensure that actually it is lower carbon emissions than actually by reusing or recycling the products. So I think that's what I've taken from it. All businesses can do what they can, and we collaborate and we take those learnings, whether they be sustainable, environmental, ESG, or commercial, and then try and apply those to our upstream supply chain as well. So we try and sell those benefits to the probably much bigger suppliers we have, and exert our influence in that way.
One thing that struck me, without any disrespect to any one of you, you were all a bit repetitive in some ways, and I've been writing down some words, and I don't know whether others spotted it, but you talked about influence and collaboration a lot. It's a challenge and an opportunity for all of you. You talked about the complexity, and it's really easy to think about supply chains as really simple. It's just one flow of transactions or goods, and you gave a really rich picture of what you were all engaged in. There's lots of questions I want to ask, and I will ask some of them, but then I'll hand over to the audience in a bit. One of the things that struck me, and if we start with you, Lloyd, and then we'll work backwards if you've got a comment on this, was the depth of what you were talking about. You really understand not only your own businesses, but either your downstream, your customer side, or upstream. And some of you were talking way, way, way upstream. This level of scrutiny that you're giving your supply chains, has it led to anything that is surprising or valuable?
Well, from our point of view, looking both up and down supply chains, there are a couple of examples, and I'd say we're small, so we can be agile, but a number of circular economy projects by the bigger supermarkets, etc., have been quite kind of publicly cancelled in recent weeks and months. And because it's something we're passionate about and it's embedded in our business, we've persisted and we've found a way that makes it work environmentally, commercially, and sustainably. And it's our commitment to that that's allowed it to happen. And then because we do it for genuinely sustainable reasons, we're prepared to share those learnings with other businesses locally, people further down our supply chain, or whatever it may be to achieve that. So that's what we've learned kind of downstream, that it is possible and it is commercially viable to do that. Upstream, I mean, an example from a few years ago, palm oil, has always been a hot topic sustainably. And as a company that can't exert a lot of influence over our supply chain in a kind of demanding way, we have to do it in a very gentle way. And, for instance, palm oil, it's very difficult to get segregated palm oil, There's a thing called mass balance, which means as long as they only sell as much ethical palm oil as they buy, it's very challenging. But one of the things we learned from palm was there was a big movement, especially with consumers, and it's an education piece, that palm was evil and the devil and responsible for deforestation, etc., which to some degree is true, but actually, now we sit on the round table of sustainable palm oil, actually palm yields way more than many other vegetable oils per hectare, and the demand for fatty oils are so high that actually if palm's responsibly sourced, it's a better option than oilseed rape or coconut, or because yields are much lower per hectare. So it's about that kind of that really surprised us doing that research, that actually, you know, the perception of something that is bad, whether it be air travel or palm oil or whatever it may be, can find its kind of place in the world and the supply chain. So an example of each way there.
Thank you, Lloyd. Over to Katie.
Thank you. Look, that was a really good point there around how for sustainable practices that might seem unsustainable, if you work with them to make them responsible, then that can generate great social and economic benefits. When it comes to travel and tourism, it provides tremendous social and economic value in the UK through jobs, skills, but also in the destination economies as well, providing income to regions that are less connected to mainland, such as the Balearics and the Canaries, for example. So we find that working with our hotels and our supply chain and our destination partners really helps propagate that. So for the launch of our Certified Sustainable Hotels programme, we found a link between hotel sustainability certifications, so hotels that have a certification to better care for the destination itself, such as the beaches that they're located on. So there's a requirement in the certification to ensure that the biodiversity is protected, the beaches are kept clean and things like that. There's also a link between certification and quality, so making sure that our customers get a high quality stay. So responding to customer demands as well. So that has really helped us with our relationships with the destinations that we fly to, and the tourism boards that we speak to are really passionate about this as well. So we're helping support their own objectives by enhancing the sustainability of our business partners. On another side of that, I think looking at supply chain has opened up our eyes just to the scale of the impacts across different industries. So one example is recently we've had an audit done on our website to understand the carbon intensity of the actual presentation of our sales website. So the delivery of traffic that comes through our website, how it's actually presented. So where you put pictures and the content that's on the website can affect its carbon footprint. So it's opened our eyes to that, and that's helped us understand where we can go next in terms of reducing our Scope 3 impact. So that's a really exciting project that we're looking forward to.
There are lots of things that we've learned from our supply chain. On the technology side, we've been forced to go right back to material level. Originally, so we could understand the benefit of extending product life was the first reason that we did that. But when you go back through the supply chain, you have to understand what's happening with technology and its rate of change, which means that you then have to understand energy efficiency, which means that you then have to look at ways you can best deliver the product to the customer in its most sustainable form. So with as few materials as possible and as energy efficient as possible. And that changes all the time. So chips change. What we're doing on chips change. Software changes. So incorporating all of that has enabled us to be better at being sustainable across the board, because you will always get customers coming to you asking for new products. If you understand the materials that's in them and you pair that with understanding about how you build your systems, you can be really confident that what you're delivering as a new piece of equipment is as sustainable as it can be. So it's kind of one big learning through having to go out into the supply chain and understand the landscape. And another side of that has been with our packaging. So we sell a sustainable business product. If you're going to do that, you have to walk the talk, as people say already. So it's like, what are we doing internally with our packaging, and what solutions are out there? And what solutions aren't there? So what can we deliver right now that's as good as it can possibly be with the constraint of not getting any returns on electronics? And that meant a lot of working with the supply chain and developing products with the suppliers, which is a nice, exciting place to be. So it was a worthwhile project for us internally, and it enables us to be really confident that we've delivered the best we can.
I feel like you and I are involved in quite a lot of similar things probably in our day job in terms of trying to establish material origins and so on. I think, so the direction of travel from our perspective, from a regulatory and disclosures perspective, is very simple. We are going to need to provide more information on more topics further upstream. What flows from that is it's sometimes very, very difficult even to know where to start. So this might sound like a really obvious point, but the way we think about it is, as the renewables industry, as the solar industry in particular, what are we buying where the supply chain we're buying from is specific to solar? And therefore, where can we as an individual buyer and as an industry have the most direct control or influence on that particular component, topic, material, whatever it may be, in terms of both the risks and opportunities that we're trying to manage? And I think, I've already mentioned this concept of traceability, which goes back to what we've been talking about, fundamentally knowing where your stuff comes from. If there are good or bad impacts, you have to begin by knowing where those impacts are occurring in order to be able to begin to address them. And 2-3 years ago, the concept of going up to your tier 4, 5, 6 suppliers, right the way back up to the mines and so on, again, very difficult to even know where to start. But fast forward, and we now talk to the manufacturers, our supply chain partners, fundamentally about, okay, so we know where this comes from for this reason. Now we want to know where this comes from for this reason. And it's about very, very early engagement. So explaining to them, this is a concept of what we're trying to do. And crucially, this is why we're trying to do it. To give them as much foresight as possible of the thing we're trying to achieve. Because at the end of the day, all businesses are nothing if not practical. If you're a client and you've got a request, people will seek to respond to that, as long as it's clear about what you're trying to do and when you want to have it by. And again, recognizing that nothing happens overnight.
I'm going to move on to another question that I've got, and one more after that, and then I'm going to open it up for questions from the audience. But I was intrigued by what you were all saying just then about some of these complex decisions about you want to do one thing because that's popular opinion, or you feel you must do something else because that's in your heart, or the data says that's the right thing to do, but you're sharing so much data and people have so much data. So I wanted to explore around how much you want your customers, your consumers to know about the decisions they're making, or to just say, look, I trust you. So I'm going to get you to think about that. It's a really difficult question, but you've all given examples where you're putting out so much information, and there's so many different people in your supply chains, from consumers to stakeholders, wider stakeholders, right, or customers. I just wondered whether you feel at times you don't want to share information because you know it's the right thing to do, you just want somebody to understand something simply, or you feel there's an element of engagement of your different suppliers, customers.
Some of our conversations, they absolutely don't want to know. They just want to know how much it costs and when they can get it.
Okay.
And they would trust our sales teams to suggest something that's right for them, and know their stuff. Those are transactional conversations that happen in the company. But then there's all the rest of it and the research side of it, where absolutely you do want to steal from your friends, like the open community says, because it means that you don't have to do the same work over and over again. And it also means that you're coming to a consensus that everybody agrees on. Now, if you look at data for long enough, you realize that all of it's wrong. It'll get you about 80% of the way there, because there's just not enough time to collect every single data point and come up with an absolutely certain answer. So what you need in that case is consensus of, we think we're about 80% now, we think that's about right. Now, can we just crack on and reduce that now, please? So that collaboration, understanding, stealing ideas is really useful. And also there's an element of celebration in that as well. So I am a big advocate of the UN Sustainable Development Goals, which are not the nitty-gritty end of supply chain verification and measurement and all of that sort of business. But what they do is they allow people to say, what am I doing well? Who else is doing the same things? How can I get a flag out and dress up in these beautiful colours and celebrate for once, because it can get quite depressing. And so that's another element of what we try and do with our stakeholders and supply chain, is to teach them how to celebrate. And then hopefully join in the celebrations, because then it's fun and engaging and you want to do more of it, which is kind of where we want to get to.
I think credible communication to customers is one of the biggest challenges for a sustainability professional, because sustainability is an incredibly complex topic, and it's important that customers are informed, but it is in a way that's understandable to them, which is one of the reasons why we use GSTC at the moment for that assurance of the GSTC recognition for our certified sustainable hotels. It's an emerging, evolving field at the minute, and it's making it quite challenging to, I guess, be trustworthy of certification schemes, because they can be quite broad. So particularly in our industry with hotel sustainability certifications, it's a very diverse market. Some standards don't require audits, so in-person audits of the hotel. Some of them are just online questionnaires. So we need to make sure that we're working with credible standards. There's also something called the EU Green Claims Directive. That's a new law that's been proposed in Europe, and this will require certifications to become accredited, so they're also being audited. And the criteria that they set for their standards, so what makes a sustainable hotel, has technical experts advising them to ensure that it does cover the breadth of the topic. So I think regulation has a key part to play, so ensuring that keeps focused on the credibility of sustainability performance, as well as reporting data as well. So I think a next step for us is to encourage our supply chain to share their emissions data, so we get a better understanding of how well they're performing, so we can make an informed judgment about how we support them with their own sustainability goals. And that's driven by regulation at the moment. So there's a number of sustainability reporting regulations out there. So yeah, I think regulation at the moment is a really big part of that. And when you're communicating to your customers, making it very clear what you mean by sustainability, so they fully understand what kind of products that you're putting out to the world.
Well, I think one of the reasons we're here is we produce, and we have done for 5 years, a kind of pretty detailed sustainability report, which takes a lot of resources internally to actually gather that data and put it into something meaningful. But we also format it in a way that makes it hopefully engaging and interesting and easy to digest for our peer stakeholders of any kind, and encourages them to act in a similar kind of way. And we've brought lots more things other than sustainability with ESG into it too. And we're happy kind of for people to steal from that and share it, and take those ideas. So go and have a look, and if it helps you shape something for yours and start measuring how you perform sustainably or ethically, or any of the issues we're talking about, please feel free to steal it. And it's that kind of collaborative sharing, which I think has been a theme throughout today, that really helps push this along. I think, again, the other thing is accreditations. I mean, we have lots of accreditations, which again take a lot of time and money to maintain. But in our industry particularly, I think greenwashing is a huge thing, and consumers are very kind of resilient to that now. And I think having every accreditation we have is third-party accredited, in-person audited, which ensures or hopefully gives our consumers confidence that we're behaving in the ways we say we are. And it's embedded in absolutely everything we do. There are some accreditations out there, the Good Business Charter, I'm sure, is one, and there is B Corp, and there are things that now consumers are taking, indicators, EcoCert, and most of them aren't perfect, but they're generally, if they're audited, they're they show business has a genuine commitment and is on the right track. So I think there are indicators for consumers, and it's something that's necessary in the demand of those consumers, that, you know, there is this greenwashing or this complexity, and I'd like to know if company A performs better than company B in that way. So I think there's progress in it, and collaboration and sharing of knowledge and experience will only encourage that.
I work for an investment fund, and one thing that a lot of people don't realise is that we're not actually investing, well, it's not our cash, it's our investors and us, who are typically institutional funds, so people like pensions, for example. And they take, of course, a very long-term view on returns. And so a really important part of my job is communicating with our investors that part of the reason we are so focused on sustainability is it's about building resilience into our business, to market risk, to reputational risk, to future regulatory requirements, and a whole bunch of other things. Because at the end of the day, they want to know that we are managing their cash as effectively as possible. Now, specifically in the renewables industry, a lot of our supply chains are based on the other side of the world. And so we get inbound queries from our investors who, you know, they've read a headline and they're concerned about something, and they want to know that we are taking a very, very detailed look at the raw material origins and other origins of our supply chains, again, to know that we are managing their money in an appropriate manner. So I think that's a really important additional motivation for why we, for example, as a business, carry out such detailed due diligence on the manufacturers from whom we buy, because it's about demonstrating, as we've been hearing about a lot this morning, about how a sustainable business is also a resilient business. And, you know, we've seen all the disruptions with COVID and other things that have happened over the last few years. And that's a really important part of why we integrate our supply chain and procurement, our sustainable commitments into our supply chain and procurement decisions. You know, they are one and the same, effectively.
This is not looking for arrogance necessarily, but if you've got something to boast about, then absolutely brilliant. We want to listen. But is there something you're doing now in your businesses that you think everyone will be doing in the future, regardless? You know, that it will be the new norm, or is there anything that you and other businesses are doing now, but it's not mainstream, but you think in 5 years' time, 10 years' time, well, that's just going to be the norm? We're not even going to discuss this issue that you're about to mention now, because it will be taken care of and it will be a norm. So if there's anything you can see that's happening.
You know, lots of people are talking about it. It seems very new now, but so we've been plugging away at it for 4 or 5 years now, and I think closed loop, I think consumers in the future will just expect that's taken care of in lots of supply chains, you know, and that will become the norm. I mean, really, it's been happening for decades when you think about your local milkman. You know, that just happened. And people didn't think about it, that supply chain. It just operated well ahead of its time. So I think those things, I think they will be more and more embedded in business and how businesses make the decisions, and hopefully, like that will just become the accepted norm, that's what happens. And many supply chains are more complex than that. That's, you know, obviously lent itself very well to that circular economy and having a full closed loop. But I think, you know, we've proved it's possible, though many people are saying it isn't at the moment with our types of products. So I think that's the one thing I think it's already happening, and will just become the accepted norm going forward.
One thing that we're starting to do that will become the norm in future is having sustainability considerations into commercial contractual agreements. So making it clear to our business partners that we care about this, and we want them to care about it too. So starting to have the conversations with them around how well they're doing in terms of sustainability. When we vet new suppliers, we now ask them questions about their sustainability performance. We ask for evidence as well, such as certifications. I feel like I'm discussing certifications to death today. So yeah, I think having clear expectations that if you want to work with us, that sustainability is vital, that you also partner with us on that as well. So that's on the supply chain side. One thing that we say at Jet2 is that every role at Jet2 is a sustainability role. And one thing that we'd like to do is try and get sustainability embedded in all of our colleagues' roles, be it they work in cabin crew, engineering, in resort, because every role is a sustainability role. Even if you work from home, there are ways in which you can be more sustainable, such as how you use your IT equipment, advocating for sustainability, discussing it with customers. So I think just getting that embedded all across the business is something that will be the norm, hopefully, in the next few years.
You willing to predict?
I agree with both of those predictions. Circularity and making it part of everybody's job role. We've got an accredited training company for IEMA in the company. We put everybody through sustainability training for that reason. My boss is here today talking about 1% improvements in the business. That's because it's efficiency. I think that what we can see in the market is looming scarcity of resources and energy. And you look at the growth curve of energy usage as we migrate onto digital systems and onto the electric grid away from fossil fuel transport and gas boilers and things like that. You've got this pinch point. So businesses are going to have to be increasingly aware of the resources that they use and the energy that they use, and they're going to have to implement what's now seen as sustainability, but it's actually just resilience.
Finally, and then we'll open for questions.
Thanks. I mean, I've mentioned it a couple of times already this morning, but I think that the ability to track and trace where all your products are coming from, including the raw materials, right back up the supply chain, I would hope / think, is definitely going to become more business as usual. And I think the reason for that is all or many of the other impacts, carbon emissions, impacts on nature, water, abstraction, usage, discharges, all the rest of it fundamentally starts from a location-based assessment of where your supply chains originate. And in order to have that, you have to know where you're buying stuff from. And that's very, very complicated as you go back up through tier 1, 2, 3, 4 suppliers. But at least in my industry in renewables, that's definitely the direction of travel. And I would hope that that will become more business as usual.
Thank you very much. Time for questions from everyone else.
Hi, Hinkin Lee, Next Energy Capital. I've got a question about supply chain traceability and whether, on the whole, we are being reactive, i.e. are the known impacts driving traceability? And, I guess pointing this at perhaps Lloyd mentioning the palm oil aspects, that's been well known. Or are we being proactive, where traceability is actually starting to identify impacts that we didn't know about?
My question to the panel is, what are your views on the disproportionate pressure that supply chain demands for sustainability put on smaller suppliers versus larger ones?
Hey, Chris from Droppoint. A few people mentioned circular economy. What interesting examples do you have of like waste products or materials coming out of your product or service that you're looking to close the loop on, whether within your own business or partnering with other businesses that can make use of your waste?
We're a big buyer in the solar industry. We do the same as what Katie was saying. We have contractual safeguards. We enforce those. We run third-party audits to verify our raw materials, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. The solar industry is kind of three industries in one. So you've got the residential rooftop industry, which is domestic installations on houses, commercial and industrial, so big sheds, warehouses, schools, universities, and so on. And then what we do, which is grid-scale power plants. We are acutely aware of the fact that smaller installers, tradespeople, do not necessarily have the same ability to develop lengthy contracts, enforce them, run all the traceability and all the rest of it that we do. And that's why, so I actually chair so Solar Energy UK is a trade association for UK Solar. I actually chair the responsible sourcing steering group for that. And we discuss this issue all the time. And one of the things that the UK industry is involved in, for example, is something called the Solar Stewardship Initiative, which is the solar-specific ESG and sustainability standard that has been developed from scratch over the last 3 years. One of the specific rationales for doing that is to enable smaller organizations to benefit from a standard, a certification, as we've been hearing about, that means they can buy product that they know has been certified to a given standard to give them comfort over what they're buying. Now, of course, that doesn't reduce the obligation upon any company to perform due diligence and make sure they're asking questions appropriate to their size and the level of risk that they're just fundamentally able to manage. But we and as an extended group, we are directly involved in so many different initiatives at an industry-wide level. And there is a self-interest to that, right? Because, like I say, many people don't realize that the solar industry, for example, is 3 industries in one. And so, to a degree, our reputation as a business is only as good as the reputation of the industry as a whole. So if smaller organizations, smaller buyers aren't able to have the same level of comfort when it comes to who they're sourcing from, that affects us as a business. So we're happy to bear, I don't want to say the free rider cost, but we view it as part of, we're doing it because it's the right thing to do, and also it's in our interest as an individual organization to ensure that the industry as a whole can access the benefits of meaningful sustainability initiatives. So I think that's kind of what I wanted to say.
We're very proactive about lots of things, and traceability and sustainability, particularly to us, is important. So I'm kind of excusing others if they're not as proactive as we are. But I think the honest truth is we're both proactive and reactive, because we can't know. I mean, would you say palms are a kind of well-established issue, or has been historically, but then things like COVID come along, and there are all sorts of challenges you have. So I think honestly we're reactive. We engage with our customers and consumers because they're often different people. We sell through wholesalers, et cetera, to end users. So we try and engage with those individual stakeholders as much as possible to find out what is important to them and what they want and what direction of travel they expect us to be having. So I think we're proactive in that way, but then we do have to be reactive in other ways. So I think we try. And the other point I'll just really quickly pick on is the kind of end-of-life waste we produce. We try and produce as little waste as possible, commercially and environmentally. And it's quite easy with our products. They're cleaning and personal care products. So we will, any end of run, part boxes, things like that, we can donate to local organisations. But then we do lots of creative things with other, if we have any plastic bottle waste, we work with an organisation called Scrap Store, and they have arts projects with young people. And, I think it's about getting creative where we can't encourage our suppliers to have a circular economy on the containers they supply to us. We have a local company that makes furniture out of them for garden spaces. And so I think if you think creatively, there are lots of things you can do with waste. And often it's people that come to us, to be honest, because they know we're a sustainable business, and say, I've got an idea for this. Can you give me your waste for free? And the answer's obviously going to be yes, because it's a great thing for both organisations.
We love the scrap stores. Yeah, it's one of our favourite things, and we partner with a charity around the corner that takes our bubble wrap and gives it to charities so they can sell online. So it's about community and networking. I'm just going to give a quick plug to Green Gain in Leeds, who are having an event talking about how they can kind of set up a swap store for businesses to look at what their waste is and what other people might need. We were invited down. We couldn't go. We couldn't go. But if anybody wants details on that, I can pass them along. You just put a list of what you need and what you've got, and they try and see what they can do about that. Also, on our own waste, what we try and do is, I've mentioned before, develop better partnerships with recyclers. And then in return for giving them business, we also ask for reporting every year. How are you getting better? How are you reducing the pollution associated with the recycling? And how many more materials are you on the way to recovering now than you were a year ago? And if we get good answers on that, then our e-waste team will probably give them more business. So that's kind of a way that we're trying to promote good behaviour with our reversed supply chain. Traceability in the tech sector. there's an interesting crossover between traceability and increased efficiency. So if you can find out where a hard drive, for example, is from, and then you can test its health, you can also say how long it's useful for. So you get this really nice dual benefit there from having traceability. And they've been talking about using traceability in the secondary market for years and years and years. They just haven't got around to it yet. And then there's a whole load of, like the serial numbers that you would need for that level of traceability has its own tech cost. But yeah, there's some interesting stuff happening there. And then different approaches. The way that we deal with that, I guess, depends on the size of company. Sorry, that was a question on disproportionate pressure on smaller suppliers. We tend to be more aggressive with the larger ones, is how we tend to handle it. So we do get involved in a little bit of advocacy. We've advocated for having a right to repair. We've done some quite high-profile things with the Environmental Audit Committee on promoting circularity, which isn't taking on people head-on, because we can't, but it's kind of trying to ease that conversation forward. Really small suppliers that aren't in a position to answer all of the over 1,000 data points of the TSRD, we would probably hold webinars. We invite them in for training, and we did a webinar on global goals, your students actually, to try and promote what the benefit of being a sustainable provider is. So we'd have a different approach there. And then across the board, we have a kind of standard code of conduct, which is a work in progress as you try and tighten it up alongside all the other things that you have to do as a medium business, or small to medium business. So that's kind of a work in progress there. And we based our code of conduct on the UNGC 10 principles, and try and build that in as much as possible. And then alongside that, make sure we're walking the talk.
So as I mentioned earlier, we work with really large hotel chains who have a lot of money to decarbonise and implement sustainability initiatives, down to the really small boutique hotels in developing economies as well. So it was really important when we were making decisions around the launch of our Certified Sustainable Hotels collection that it was carrot, not stick. So bringing them on the journey with us, not making it an additional expense that they'll have to fork out for. And the way we did that is framing it as a business opportunity, because it is a business opportunity for every hotel. So we have looked at market research, and there is a market trend towards sustainable travel choices and hotels with sustainability certifications. We did some internal research as well, and we know that over half of Jet2 customers would feel better staying at a certified sustainable hotel. We've also, looking at our website traffic, found that of the customers that search for our Certified Sustainable Hotels collection, the conversion rate is higher. So customers that are looking for a more sustainable way to stay tend to book there and then on the day. So it's actually supporting our sales as well. In terms of how it can help their organisations, sustainability is a cost-saving opportunity as well. Being more energy efficient reduces your energy bills. It attracts more customers, as I've mentioned. So there's lots of ways in which it is a business opportunity. Having said that, we know that sustainability certification does cost because it requires audit and verification. So we partnered with an organisation, a charity called Green Key, who are one of the many hotel sustainability certification schemes out there. And they, through our partnership with them, we are providing our hotels a discount on the Green Key levy, so it makes it cheaper for them and a more attractive opportunity for them as well. On the circular economy side of things, I think for us and I suppose the wider industry, it's something that we're probably at the start of our journey on. Aviation has been very much focused around climate change, and rightfully so. And we're also restricted by waste management options that we have. So, for example, it might surprise you to hear that waste that arises from international air transport, which is a headache from Brexit, so thanks Brexit, means that anything that has come into contact with food on your flight legally has to be incinerated or deep landfilled. So the vast majority of the waste that's generated on our flight isn't recycled, which is quite heartbreaking, really. So I've been working on a project with government to try and change that. So I've been working on a working group with DEFRA and the Animal and Plant Health Agency, which is the regulator for international catering waste, to try and change that and come up with a solution for how we can segregate what is considered by law hazardous waste, so that's the foodborne waste, from the clean recyclables, such as, you know, your plastic tumblers that you use on flight for your in-flight drinks, and food packaging and things like that. So we're coming to the end of that project now, and fingers crossed we will have that guidance published by the regulator, and then we can start working to enhance our onboard recycling.
It's been fascinating listening to you all, and it's been really insightful what you've talked about in your businesses and from a wider perspective on supply chain.
So I'm going to start with a bit of an introduction and some context, and then we'll dig straight into the questions, if I may. So this panel is about nature and business and how we can integrate it. So the term nature is gaining a lot of traction among businesses and public organisations, where they're seeking to navigate the complexities around climate change action and integrate it with other critical nature ecosystems. Now, integrating nature into business and investment is about addressing the main drivers of nature loss. And these drivers are identified by the Intergovernmental Science and Policy Platform on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services, and that's known as IPBES. So basically the scientists behind the trends. And IPBES identified 5 direct drivers of nature loss. And these are changing use of sea and land, so conversion of sea and land, direct exploitation of organisms, climate change, pollution, and alien non-native species, invasive non-native species. The 2 lesser well-known indirect drivers of nature loss is people's disconnect with nature and the resulting lack of value placed on the importance of nature. IPBES reports a host of really shocking statistics on the decline of nature. And also WEF, the World Economic Forum, outlines and states that at least 50% of global domestic product GDP is dependent or directly and highly dependent on nature, or at least moderately dependent on nature. IPBES reports that there's been 47% decline in natural ecosystems, 25% of species already threatened with extinction. 3/4 of land-based environment have been significantly altered by human actions. More than 1/3 of the world's land surface is now devoted to crop and livestock production, and up to $577 billion USD in global crops are at risk from pollinator loss. And 100 to 300 million people are at increased risk of floods, hurricanes, because of the loss of coastal habitats and protection. So negative trends in nature will continue to 2050 and beyond in all of the policy scenarios that have been explored by IPBES reports, due to the projected impacts of increasing land use change, exploitation of organisms, climate change. So this is where transformative change is absolutely needed to alter those policy scenarios. So my name is Hinkin Lee, Vice President with Next Energy Capital. I'm delighted to welcome a really knowledgeable panel of experts to discuss the integration of nature across businesses. Our panelists bring a wealth of experience from diverse backgrounds, providing unique insights from development and planning through to investment and nature-based solutions. I'm joined by Mike Barker, Operational Director at RPS Tetra Tech, Rachel Taylor, Lead Planning Manager at Nat Power UK, Catherine Deegan, Vice President in the Investment Banking Division at RBC Capital Markets, and Alex Tozer, Chief Operating Officer at Replanet. I haven't done that in order because they haven't sat in the order that I've written it. So as we begin the discussion, please do introduce yourself before you speak. Mike, so RPS and Tetra Tech work closely with lots of different businesses when it comes to nature consultancy services. Can you share some insight into what businesses should be considering when it comes to nature and why?
Thank you, Lee. So So I'm Mike Barker. I run a team of about 85 ecologists in the UK. We're dotted around 15 different locations, and we work across a whole range of sectors. A lot of our clients are private sector businesses. We're doing a lot of work with house builders, mixed-use developers, but also at the moment, more and more renewable projects are coming across our door, and we're working on those. And there's some real interesting insights in terms of those sectors and nature, and particularly impacts on ecology in the UK and how that works. And I think, I've been working in the sector for 30 years. We've been doing ecological impacts for 30 years on planning and consenting new developments. What's been clear in that process is that there always have been small residual impacts on nature built into developments as they happen, which aren't necessarily always fully mitigated and compensated for. And what has changed recently is the government has brought in legislation which requires biodiversity net gain on all planning applications. That's become law in February of this year, and that's actually changing the way that development is done in the UK, well, in England. There are different systems coming forward in Wales and Scotland that will mirror this, but in England, biodiversity net gain is driven by DEFRA and the legislation there. And the way that it's working is it's picking up the mitigation hierarchy that we've always used in assessing ecological impacts from development. But what it's trying to do is capture all of those, setting a baseline, measuring those impacts, putting a value to them, and then making sure that there's always an uplift at the end. And the uplift that the government has set for now is 10%. There are some local authorities and regulators that are asking for more than 10% in places. And this is driving quite a lot of change. And actually, it's although it's only come into legislation in February, I've been working on biodiversity net gain for probably 3 or 4 years, as people have been trying to get on the front foot on this. But it's really interesting to see how it's changing, even since February, the way that development is done. And if we look at that in relation to the mitigation hierarchy, it's changing how sites are being selected. If it has a high value in terms of ecology, then it's much harder to get a net gain at the end because you have to show an uplift. And so high value ecological sites are being avoided. Where there is ecology in place, then they're looking to minimize those impacts by looking at better design and building with nature and working with the grain of the sites that they're developing. It's also looking to provide mitigation in terms of work. Sorry, just remembering what the mitigation hierarchy was. So mitigation in terms of how that design works. So retaining habitats on site, using those sorts of habitats to look at how you can build those into design, and then enhancement where you're looking at restoration of neglected or low value ecology and habitats, and looking at and enhancing those and getting an uplift in biodiversity.
If I can just go to Catherine and just ask where, in the investment space, how and what is the most significant way financing can influence natural ecosystems?
So thinking about the question, it's very interesting. I believe that currently, among most institutional investors, the sort of importance placed on nature as an investment factor, it's growing, but it's definitely still below where we want it to be. It's not near the front of the queue in terms of factors that influence investment decisions. But for me, I think this creates an opportunity, because as we educate investors on the impacts and materiality of their capital allocation decisions on nature, over time, it should begin to impact capital flows, so redirect capital away from activities that are harming nature and more towards positive activities. And we'll probably come onto it in more detail a bit later in the discussion, but frameworks like the TNFD are hugely important as part of this education process, because if the data about the impact on nature of business activities is there, if it's in the annual report, the prospectus, the marketing document, it can't be ignored by investment committees who are making decisions about how to allocate capital. So they'll need to take nature into account, both from sort of a risk mitigation but also a positive impact perspective. And then when we raise the profile of nature as an investment factor, I believe there's also a second order impact, because if the gatekeepers of capital are putting in place an investment hurdle in relation to nature, then businesses which need to raise capital now or are thinking about raising capital in the future, need to make nature a business priority. And I think this is important for, somewhat forcing the issue. I think that Lloyd made a really important point earlier about the difference between businesses that are mission-driven and businesses that are not. Because for mission-driven businesses, perhaps integration of nature might be slightly more straightforward, whereas for other organizations, they are retrofitting and they need to make nature a priority, and making it a factor that can influence how much capital they can attract is certainly one way to do that.
From your perspective, what are the key opportunities and challenges for businesses looking to invest in nature?
Thanks. Alex Tozer, Replanet. I think that the key challenges for businesses wanting to invest in nature are probably, there's lots of them, but there's a lot around risk of sort of perceived transparency. So something that when Replanet was started, that we really recognized was that philanthropy and government funding were never going to be enough to make any material, or to make the material change that's needed in the preservation of the natural world and biodiversity. And so the private sector has to come in. And so we were sort of set up in order to try and drive large-scale ecological restoration using private sector financing and using different financing gateways to do that. But when you're bringing the private sector in, then the risks that the private sector face are very different to the public sector and very different to the risks that philanthropists face. So if I'm sitting on a board of a large, FTSE 100 company, and I've got a choice where I can put millions of pounds into a project that there isn't really clear governance of, and that project could be fantastic for nature, it could do all these amazing things, but there's one negative article that's written about the project in The Guardian or in another paper or anything like that. And I think, well, that's actually worse than doing nothing. And so for the private sector, I think that the main challenge that they face really is being able to proudly shout about what they're doing. And to be able to do that and to say, actually, we know that there aren't lots of perfect solutions out there, but there are now some really nice mechanisms that are coming into play in order to facilitate that. And that, I think, is where the opportunities come in. And so I think we should all be really proud that we've got biodiversity net gain in England, because it's one of the only sort of government-led systems in the whole world that's actually really sort of quantifying and putting quite clear mitigation priorities onto businesses. So I think that's already a fantastic opportunity that everyone in the private sector is sort of encumbered with, but can actually now go out and do. But I think sort of moreover, then you've got now real opportunities with things like TNFD and CSRD. So these frameworks that allow businesses to report on their nature-based impacts means that actually people are starting to realize, the customers are starting to realize that sustainability is about more than just carbon, it's about more than just emissions, it's also massively about biodiversity. And there are now these opportunities for businesses to quantify biodiversity impacts and nature-based impacts within their supply chain. and within their, within their business as a whole, and to look at not just what they're doing internally, but also, the impacts right across the supply chain, and really report on those in a measured and clear way. And I think that that's sort of really where we came into this space, and I think it's a great opportunity now for the private sector to actually be a driving force in biodiversity change.
How does a renewable energy developer contribute to both positive and negative impacts on natural ecosystems?
Well, firstly, we come with significant investment from our bankers and investors, but I think it's important to start from the beginning with this, and we have seen significant changes with government reforms of late. The Labour government came in July this year and has already started setting about transforming the renewable energy industry. So, for example, we have this target to achieve net zero by 2050. We also have, the government also wants to see achieve decarbonisation of the energy sector by 2035. So that leaves us with just over a decade to decarbonise our energy sector. And the government has also introduced the Great British Energy to reform everything, and we also have recently seen the consultation documents on NPPF, that's the National Planning Policy Framework, which has brought about a complete reform of thinking behind renewable energy. Previously, we had a de facto ban on onshore wind in England, and in Scotland we're seeing the complete opposite and have done for several years. So we are starting to see some really positive changes in planning reform. And we've also seen, as Mike and Alex have alluded to, BNG and the introduction of that in February this year, which has set about mandating a minimum of 10% BNG. So what we're doing as a developer is that when we're land sourcing, we have a geographical information system in-house which we've set up and designed ourselves so that we can source land. And the first part of that is understanding sensitivities, habitats, and opportunities as well. So we will look for sites where we know there are no sensitive designations, such as SSSIs, special areas of conservation. And we also, in part of the design, once we've got site selection, we will start thinking about buffer zones in and around of any constraints. We'll also look at other factors, such as agricultural land classification, buffer zones around residential areas, etc. We'll also look at sourcing the clean technology, and Kevin was talking about that earlier on as well. So we want to know that whatever technology we're bringing to site, we can offset that carbon. It is usually manufactured offshore, so we look to do a trade-off and offset that carbon as part of our projects. As a developer, we want to be a good neighbour. That's not only just for the local community, but that's also for nature and wildlife. So yeah, we want to be good neighbours. One of the things that we have looked at is also proximity to peatland. We would never want to damage peatland whatsoever, but we see some areas as an opportunity. So for example, peatland which has, it's degraded, it's in poor condition, we can look to actually invest in restoring that and coming up with a very, very comprehensive restoration plan in addition to our planning proposals. So renewable energy in itself is clean technology. And obviously, in introducing the clean technology, we can have less reliance upon fossil fuels in the future. We all know the consequences of continued use of fossil fuels and the impacts on climate change. So as a developer, we can really, really go to town on the likes of BNG and all those kind of really good proposals. Also, in the long term, we usually seek planning permissions with a timescale. This allows us the flexibility to change the technology at times when we feel better technology is coming in. And it also allows us to return that land back to its former condition, if not better condition than what it previously was. So that's decommissioning, restoring the land to a high quality.
But one of the biggest challenges that businesses face is quantifying the return on or the value that they get from nature. And I think from, we've touched on compliance, we've touched on that overall kind of social license to operate, doing the right thing. But from your different sectors, how do you measure the business benefits of investing in nature and ecosystem health? And if I can direct this back to Rachel to kick us off, because I'm sure there are trade-offs when it comes to nature in development decision-making and renewable energy.
Yeah, absolutely, Lee. One of the difficulties we encounter is that, first and foremost, to be able to develop a renewable energy site, whether that's solar, battery, onshore wind, we have to have a grid supply. Grid supplies tend to be in open areas of countryside, which inevitably, sometimes that's habitat, sometimes that's agricultural land. But what we can find is even we can trade off with solar energy development, for example, which not only generates power for the grid, but we can also accommodate livestock grazing, and sheep happily graze under solar panels. In terms of other trade-offs, we also have landscape impacts, we have noise impacts, and it's really about trying to harmonise and find that balance. So what we tend to do is, once we've found the site, we will find additional land to try and achieve that biodiversity net gain. And as a developer, we're not looking for 10%, we're not looking for 20%. We'll go way beyond that and achieve 100%. And in some cases, 200%. It's easier with solar panels, for example. So we never stop trying to find those trade-offs. Sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't, but with collaboration with local authorities, county ecologists, and in trying to achieve that really comprehensive understanding and value of a site. And that's where we go to the likes of people who, like Mike, who can provide us with that expertise in how we can actually regenerate a site. And we'll look for those sites that have the lowest value, so that we can really invest in the mitigation to enhance, avoid enhancing. And Mike talked about the mitigation hierarchy. So that's something that we really look at as a developer as well.
How do you and your clients, Mike, perceive the business case for nature? And if you could share some insights on those tangible benefits that you can get from focusing on nature, as well as the challenges across the various sectors that you work across.
I would say there's been a real sea change in my time in the business. Some of our developers, particularly some fairly hard-nosed house builders, if you go back to 10, 20 years, really ecology was one of the problems that they had. It just turned up on their sites. It was something that they needed to get rid of. It was always a problem. I think there's been an absolute change in the mindset, particularly around some of the larger house builders. They actually are looking at better design. They're building with nature. They are looking at how to mitigate impacts. But I've seen it this year in particular, that the biodiversity net gain mechanism is driving them away from sites that otherwise they would perhaps try and develop, but they're finding that actually the baseline values are such that they're not now building on those sites. And I've seen that happen just literally January, February this year. Sites have been pretty much abandoned rather than taking them to appeal, because really they were going to lose on biodiversity terms. But actually, I've also seen it in Cambridge. I'm based in Cambridge. There's a lot of housing and other development pressures there. In Greater Cambridgeshire, a lot of house building is being targeted for that area. There's some real pressures there around how you can have that much development sustainably. And there's issues around water scarcity in particular. And actually, East Anglia is really challenged in terms of water supply. And some of the issues around that are because if the abstraction locally is causing nature impacts on the riverine systems, chalk streams. Chalk streams are one of the rare habitats that occur in British Isles. Disproportionately, we have over 200 of them. It's almost 80% of the global resource in chalk streams, particularly in south and southern and eastern England. And that they are really very sensitive to over-abstraction. And actually, at the moment, a number of developments are being challenged because water supply is a real issue. Where is the water going to come from for these houses? And actually, that environment is so water stressed that one particular water company, Essex and Suffolk Water, has put a ban on business growth in one of their catchments. They've basically said for the next 8 years, they're not going to supply new businesses in that area because they have an investment plan that's going to take at least 8 years before they can have a sustainable source. And that water is coming from the Humber. They're piping it from the Humber all the way down to Essex. And that's not terribly sustainable, but fundamentally, if there's no rain falling or not enough rain falling in Essex and Suffolk, that's the only way they're going to get water. The alternative was desalination, and actually that's not very sustainable either. So they're caught slightly in between things, but that water scarcity is driven by climate change. And I think actually, and you go full circle and you say, well, you know, how do you look at impacts on climate, on nature? And one of the key ways to offset impacts on nature is to deal with climate change.
Thanks, Mike. We absolutely have to protect our chalk streams, groundwater-fed, ranunculus-filled, lovely rivers that we have, and agree. You know, not only that in terms of people's dependencies, but all the other added social, spiritual, less kind of, I guess, more esoteric services that you get from nature often gets missed. And we talk about impacts around nature. And we know that nature is a bit more complex than measuring climate. Climate is perhaps one metric. So Catherine, how important are metrics and indices across nature, and how are kind of financiers starting to think about this more quantitatively in the context of, you know, riding the wave of climate action?
Sure. So I think in terms of the importance of metrics and indices for, you know, the sort of financial ecosystem, probably the importance of the metrics, you know, can't really be understated. I think they'll really be quite crucial for actually driving change. And I think the first point to consider here is the importance of nature-related metrics to banks like the Royal Bank of Canada, but also our peers, because I think quantitative measures really allow us to track and work out how nature-related impacts and factors should map to the cost of capital. So in my role, we set the price at which equity investors are asked to provide capital, and we also have a very large corporate lending team that lend out our balance sheet to businesses, and they work out the appropriate rate of interest to charge. So if we're actually able to look at nature and quantitatively map financial risk reward, we can really start to facilitate a reduced cost of capital for organisations that have a positive impact on nature. And that's something that we already do for factors like GHG emissions. We are able to offer a lower cost of capital to businesses whose emissions are lower or who are able to demonstrate an improvement. So really, if we're able to get there for nature over time, that will be a huge positive. I think metrics and indices are also quite important for investors. So a lot of institutional investors in the city, they use computer and data-driven screens to filter for potential investment opportunities, and then they sort of apply the human overlay to the investments that pass through the filter. And typically it's factors like valuation, yield, liquidity, etc., but also ESG ratings. And I think adding nature-related metrics into the mix will be a really important way of sort of raising the profile of nature-positive investments and redirecting capital flows over the long term. Although when I think about metrics and indices, there is also a risk, right? Because the data needs to be, robust. If metrics are open to misinterpretation or are not well understood, actually there is a risk that the metrics could be detrimental to the process of helping capital allocators to understand their impact on nature. So this is where frameworks like TNFD and like science-based targets are hugely important, because they help provide guidance to the people who are measuring the data, and they help to provide context to people like investors who might not have a huge amount of knowledge but are tasked with interpreting the data. And I think they can sort of bridge the gap between the huge amounts of research that are that's been conducted into nature and the group of investors who are sort of tasked with interpreting data that relates to their impact on nature.
Thanks, Kat. Data and metrics is absolutely key to the nature discussion. It feels like it's key to a lot of the themes that have been discussed today as well. And I guess if you work across nature, I'm really glad the conversation is moving kind of away from those keystone species, the fluffy animals, and it's actually starting to drill down to the science-based, evidence-led, topical questions around nature. And Alex, the industry that you're working across with regard to offering a solution for nature, and then touching on the same theme of questioning around the business case, you interact with a lot of investors, I'm sure. What are their kind of business drivers to actually investing in a nature-based solution? And I guess, first of all, what is a nature-based solution?
Thanks. First of all, I'm really glad that Catherine said that metrics are important, because otherwise it would have succinctly rubbished our business model entirely. So I was pretty glad about that. What is a nature-based solution? Well, a nature-based solution is effectively any way of generating an output that is beneficial to nature. And so when we talk about nature-based solutions in our sector, then quite often people will look at carbon projects as a potential for nature-based solutions. So if you're a business that wants to offset your carbon emissions, then you can do a few things. You might want to invest in DAC, so direct air capture, for example, and that's where you can effectively, someone might build a machine that sucks carbon dioxide out of the air. That's not a nature-based solution. Whereas if you're planting trees or if you're doing something in nature, then you have got a natural solution that's generating benefits for biodiversity as well, which is also generating those carbon credits. And there's a whole world of nature-based solutions out there. I think the key from our perspective has always been about being able to put nature succinctly on the balance sheet. And that really comes down to quantification, because if you can properly securitize something, if you can say, well, nature isn't this intangible thing that just kind of feels nice and looks good and that we can sing about happily, then that's where you can then move it out of the philanthropy and government sector and into the private sector. And so for us, yeah, it's really all about being able to quantify it properly, because most organizations, most investors, when they're looking for a nature-based project, then typically they'll have a carbon target, or they'll have some sort of emissions offsets requirement that they're looking for, but also they'll have now they'll have some biodiversity or nature-based reporting targets. And frankly, most organizations don't really know what they're going to have to do, but they know they're going to have to do something. Because there's new reporting requirements coming in. People look at things like the TNFD and CSRD and think, well, what does this actually mean for my business? And so what I think that we as project developers and as advisors in that space need to be able to do is to really tell organizations, this is what you can potentially put your funds into, and this is what it will bring you. And that might mean quantifying it by a certain percentage of uplift. So saying over 30 years, we've achieved a 200% uplift in this target site. Across our supply chain, we've achieved X percentage uplift in biodiversity. And when you're talking about biodiversity, then you have to be able to say what that actually means. Because one of the biggest problems that the nature-based solutions market or space has had is, how on earth do you quantify biodiversity? So carbon's quite easy to quantify because it's a molecule, so you can measure it. Whereas how on earth do you measure something as seemingly intangible as biodiversity? And so there's now different metrics, different ways of doing it. And so we spent a lot of time suggesting and putting together, working in a big working group with like the World Economic Forum, IUCN, UNDP, lots of different stakeholders to sort of put forward these methodologies that were then taken up by the Wallacea Trust and turned into this way which sort of mirrors like the consumer price index, a way of actually measuring the important metrics within biodiversity that are relevant to the ecosystem in which you're operating. So it mirrors the CPI, because when we compare inflation rates between China and England, then you look at a basket of goods, you look at what people are buying in those places. They're not the same things, but you can still compare something that's derived from them. So you can still compare things like inflation and the economies. And so we took a similar approach. And so that ultimately enables businesses, and it crucially enables custodians of nature. So whether that's farmers, whether that's landowners, small landholders, large landholders, enormous businesses with massive environmental assets, it enables them to be able to quantify and monetize those assets, monetize that part of the picture. And so that's sort of what we're trying to do. But I think the crucial thing then is that making it tangible and being able to advise on things like CSRD and the TNFD and those really clear metrics, so that businesses ultimately, they want to be able to say quantifiably and clearly, this is the difference that we have made.
So nature market, we'll stick on this theme for now. Nature markets are obviously critical to start investors understanding how much we could actually get from nature. Because I guess the challenge with nature-based solutions historically has been, well, it's an offset, and therefore you're skipping all of the mitigation hierarchy of avoidance. But perhaps you can contextualize that with the task in hand, right, in terms of the global biodiversity framework, the decline in nature, and then obviously what we want to do is recover in nature. And so what's your perspective on that with regard to a do nothing scenario, or actually do something about nature recovery?
I think you're absolutely right that a lot of the conversation has been about offsets. And I think that now the frameworks are enabling organizations to move away from that mindset and to start thinking more about mitigation. Because ultimately, if you can measure, then it means that you know what you're doing right now within your supply chain. And so that then means that you can then start looking at ways in which you can reduce impacts. You can champion a project that might mean everything from changing the way that you are farming wheat or changing the way that you're grazing cattle, through to things like tree planting on agricultural land. There's lots of different ways that within a supply chain you can then start significantly reducing your impacts on nature. And so again, quantifying that, measuring that, is something that can then be brought to companies. And ultimately, that quantification process, the securitizing it, means that then investors come to play. Because if there's something that can be quantified, then that something can usually be bought and sold. And if you can buy and sell it, then bingo, you're into capital markets. And that's where you can really scale. And that's what ultimately we need is scale. So yeah, I think moving away from offsets is really, really important. I mean, that's not to say that offsets are bad. Absolutely not, because I hope not, because we deal or we encourage lots of people to offset. But I think that it's changing the mindset so that organizations are not just thinking about offsite, offset, polluter pays, we can do this, but it's all right because we do something else somewhere else, but actually thinking about within our supply chain, what can we change, what can we alter, and how do we measure that? And that's where the new frameworks and new opportunities for measurement really are making a difference and should be making a tangible difference, I think.
Thanks, Alex. And I think our conversation has absolutely been focused on where we can have impact at scale. And by virtue of that, we're focusing on capital markets where the money is, and that will make the difference. But for businesses, I think, going down to that scale where you can relate to it at a business level. Perhaps, Rachel, do you have any kind of, I guess, any applications or strategies that perhaps businesses could take from the way in which you approach development that could be applicable to businesses?
Yeah, absolutely, Lee. I think there's a range of initiatives that different industries can adopt. I think one of the things that could be looked at amongst perhaps aviation and the residential sector as well is how you can combine biodiversity with recreation and education. For example, some of the sites that we're developing at the moment, we're bringing forwards fantastic ideas for nature reserves. And that's on site as well, so in and around the whether that's solar or battery. And we're looking at introducing species which are not there as part of the baseline. So we're really, really enhancing that site. And obviously we need to understand the site first and foremost. So it's about investing in those surveys, getting the best ecologists, getting the best landscape architects to come and come together and collaborate to create this fantastic opportunity as part of these developments. So one of the ideas is the nature reserves. So we're bringing forward nature reserves with the idea of allowing school children to come and learn from the nature reserve, learn about renewable energy, having bird hides around wetland areas so that people can come and enjoy the different variety of bird species which will be attracted to the area. We're also introducing outdoor classrooms into the development as well, so that local school children can come and enjoy the area and understand about what we're doing and see the fantastic biodiversity and nature that we're bringing to the site. All this comes at a cost, and what we're looking to do as well is set up a community foundation. And we are bringing in the region of £1 million per project to invest in the local community. And as part of that, we are having public consultation events and speaking directly with the public to see how they would like to see that money spent in the area. And that could be sustainable transport, it could be sustainable farming, and even just introducing that word sustainability, that further down the line, that you'll have that impact upon reducing climate change and the effects of that. So we're bringing forward all those kind of fantastic ideas to not only to regenerate, to kind of create renewable energy, but also bring much needed investment into a lot of communities.
It's just like supply chain, you know, it affects all of us in terms of our decision making and where we're spending money. And it sounds like due diligence is a key part of whether it's on an individual level, i.e. where does our pensions go, versus, you know, at a business level, where is our capital and procurement going? Is it going to harmful activities or is it going to nature positive activities? And just last two questions before we cut to the audience for some questions. But so Catherine, how would you start differentiating investors who are integrating nature in finance and those who are still undecided?
So I think there's a couple of key factors here. One of them Kevin alluded to earlier, actually. So if you take Next Energy Capital, for example, they are making investment decisions, but they get their capital from somewhere else. They might have an investment from BlackRock, for example, and actually BlackRock might have that capital from a pension fund. So it's quite a mechanical factor, but you know, if we go up the chain of where the capital actually originates from, if that pension fund is very focused on nature, then BlackRock has to be, and then Next Energy has to be. So it's quite a mechanical yet very important factor. So that's one point. I'd say another is the ethos of the investor, and that could be driven by strength of their leadership. It could be driven by their mission. But that really determines whether, in relation to nature, which is, you know, quite an emerging field for investors, are they going to be a leader, or is it more likely that they're going to sit back and wait to see what market practice is and then just follow the market practice? And then I'd say the third factor for an investor is probably their understanding of the topic, understanding of nature and how actually to integrate it. And this is where some of the frameworks that I mentioned earlier become hugely important. So thinking about, you know, what can businesses which offer positive impacts on nature do to attract capital? You know, I'd say step one is definitely, you know, developing a very fulsome understanding, you know, of the business impact on nature, and then being able to articulate a very sort of concise and relevant narrative around that externally is sort of the most important thing to do.
Are there trends that are emerging around businesses and those challenges that they need to address, particularly when it comes to the resource-intensive industries in the context of nature?
Clearly there are, and I think actually the topic of palm oil has come up once or twice already. And just as an example, traceability and visibility of where those commodities come from, whether it's palm oil or whether it's a mineral, you know, copper, that it's coming from an extractive sector as well. That you really need to be able to, within the metrics that you're building up, you need to have data that is transparent and relatable to a geography. You have to say where it's coming from, because otherwise how can you measure the ecological impact? The ecological impact happens on the ground where the commodity is resourced from. And so you need to measure the baseline there, and you need to understand the ecological impact of the extractive or the manufacturing process. And similarly with pollution at the other end of the supply chain, trying to close that loop, understanding what those emissions are, reducing the emissions, ensuring that there isn't pollution, long-lived chemicals in the environment going into the water, into river systems and the oceans. So it's that supply chain transparency that is absolutely key, because that provides reliable data that goes into the metrics that allows the money people to understand and quantify and be able to compare different investments and make sensible choices about where investments should go. And I think, sorry if I'm summing up, but one thing that really struck me is that actually the UK and England in particular, because it's got the biodiversity net gain metric, it's really opened up an opportunity for the UK to be a leader in this field in terms of financial institutions being able to provide nature-based solutions that are absolutely embedded in science and measurable, quantifiable ecological improvement and enhancement. So you can see the biodiversity increases on the land, you can measure them. And I think that's really important. And the renewable sector is definitely out ahead on this. You know, onshore wind, we do a lot of work in Scotland. Most of our work is around peatland restoration and raptors. We spend a lot of time looking at raptors and making sure that the peatland restoration and the habitat restoration provides an ecosystem where those sorts of top predators can exist in harmony with the wind farms, which are built somewhere slightly out of the way so they don't bump into each other. And that whole knitting together is really key to making sure that nature-based solutions really work.
Thank you, Mike, and thank you, everyone, for your really valuable insights. I think, as a sum up before we have questions, it's a complex topic, nature, and off the back of the momentum built by climate action, I think it's well understood that all businesses interact with nature. Our well-being is dependent on nature, and it's not until we start understanding how we interact with nature and its natural resources, as well as the services that they provide, until we can actually make some meaningful impact, either manage that risk or even leverage the opportunities that come from it. Businesses are only just starting to understand it, and it's something that we shouldn't shy away from. We've got the Global Biodiversity Framework, and we've got IPBES telling us that, you know, we're in this catastrophic decline in nature, and we're past the tipping point. And I think this is the elephant in the room, really, for all of us, is that we need to address this head on. It needs to be at the top of the list of acknowledging that we are fundamentally all, I don't want to be too negative, but doomed if we don't start thinking about this seriously, right? Natural capital accounting, understanding how we interact with it, making sure that we're measuring it, making sure that we really understand what our risk exposures are across our business. And not until then, we can then implement some strategic action across all of our businesses to make it more resilient and ultimately successful in the medium to long term. I'd like to open it to the floor now to get some questions.
Thanks very much, guys, for the panel discussion. My name is Sam McGuire. I run a sustainability consulting practice. There's a lot of discussion around metrics and the importance of metrics, and they're incredibly valuable in terms of driving change. But for me, there's two aspects that have to go with it. There has to be a fundamental understanding of nature and its complexity outside of metrics. And there has to be an intimacy, a love and care of nature as well from individuals. It can't just be numbers on a spreadsheet. So one of the things that I'm trying to build into my practice is how can we get people out of the offices, out of their buildings and going and interacting with nature. I guess would love to hear from you guys how best you've seen, I guess, exposure to nature driving change and how you've maybe applied some of that thinking.
Thank you very much for what you've been talking about. For my understanding, how much of what you're talking about is businesses explicitly doing the things you're talking about because they have to, and how much is coming implicitly because of the business operation itself? It implicitly does good. Are you seeing, you know, have you got any examples, or have you got a? So it's the very presence and the operation of the business or the asset or the investment.
Well, in York, as everybody knows, we have a lot of problems with water. And I always say, because I live part of the time in the Netherlands, why don't you consult the Dutch? Because obviously they know what to do with water. So does that happen? go to countries that you think, okay, they're doing something that is what we can learn from. Thank you.
Yeah, great. Okay, so we've got one on metrics, and how do we, I guess, drive change and get people out and actually acknowledge that, get people in touch with nature to really understand what the intricacies are. We've got a question around, are businesses doing it because of compliance, regulatory, or are there, can we give some examples about other reasons and other drivers? And then are we collaborating where impacts might be more apparent in other geographies? And does that knowledge sharing work? I'll pass it on to our panel, whoever wants to take any of those.
I'm tempted to do the last two, but I'll do the first one, which is getting people out into nature and how do we build that reconnection between people and nature. And I think actually this is something that it's really about integrating good design in development. It's about people and places. It's about multifunctional green space where you've got recreational use, you've got surface water management, you've got nature and nature conservation all in the same place. And so people can just through osmosis really just be in nature without necessarily having to go to a nature reserve. It's green space on their doorstep. And I think access to green spaces, it is a government priority. They have recognized that people need to have access to green spaces for well-being, for mental well-being. That is difficult, particularly in urban environments. But there's some really interesting projects around nature-based solutions for pocket parks, and actually knitting that together with collaboration. There's some really interesting design around replanting really species diverse small pocket parks that has been pioneered elsewhere in Europe, that has come across and been incorporated here. And that sort of collaboration about best practice is actually, in the environmental world, we're magpies. We do like to go and borrow good ideas. And I think actually things like the renewable sector, so not necessarily onshore wind, but onshore wind is part of that. But I also work offshore in terms of offshore wind. And offshore wind development is very much a global market. And actually things like marine compensation and those sorts of ideas, but also how those projects come ashore, because they all have to come ashore. They all have cable routes that have to connect to the grid. They're very attuned to building in these sorts of social benefits as well, mainly driven by the Scandinavians, I have to say, particularly the Danish, but there you go.
In terms of getting people out in nature and out to site, this is something that we have found to be hugely important for raising awareness of nature. So one of my clients is Next Energy Solar Fund, which is a listed solar fund, and there are regularly investor visits out to see the sites. And when investors sign up, they primarily want to often know about things like how the assets are being managed to maximize generation, and they want to come and look at some of the co-located batteries and that sort of thing. But actually, Next Energy make a huge effort when investors are on site to talk to them about natural capital and the impact on nature. And actually, it always comes up hugely in the investor feedback from those visits. I didn't know that they were doing all of this, but now I do know. I'm much more interested to sort of follow and see whether, other companies are doing similar. So getting people out to site is really important. One thing that we should probably do more of is getting more people out to site. So often we would have the portfolio manager, but who we're not bringing is the stewardship teams. So at most large investment institutions, there are stewardship teams that are making sure that factors like nature and broader sustainability are integrated into investment decisions. These guys actually probably know an awful lot about nature, and sort of getting them out to site as well is something that we should do more of. And then on the second question, I think there's definitely sectors to which nature considerations does play more naturally. So again, solar parks is an example because it's very land intensive. You know, these businesses are much more cognizant day to day of the impact on nature. In terms of my role, I'm a generalist, so I also look after banks and healthcare companies. And I would say that the management teams are just more disconnected from their impact on nature, even though they know that they have one. And to bridge that gap, I would say there's probably a need for industry-specific guidance to help companies at least start to think about their responsibilities and what they should be doing so that they can then take that away and start to implement it.
In reference to the first project on exposure to nature and driving change, our company logo is growing by nature, and that's something that we maintain and strive to do every day of our working week. We also, in terms of getting out onto site, when we have a project in the early stages, we will be out there getting a full understanding of that, and that will be alongside our suppliers, and also with the local authorities where they have the capacity to join us to discuss different features, different characteristics and potential impacts of developing a particular site. So we always strive to engage and to collaborate. And also alongside that, we engage with local schools and take them to site and teach them about renewable energy and the importance of it for their future as well. I think on the second point, doing things because whether we do it because we're a business or we're not, well, first and foremost, I'm not just a town planner, I'm a chartered environmentalist, and it's something that's ingrained within me. I live in the countryside, I value the countryside, and I wish to protect the countryside, but I also wish to provide a sustainable future for my children and their children as well. Obviously, we have to comply with minimum standards. Yep, planning standards, BNG. But I did mention earlier, we're not looking for 10% BNG, we're not looking for 20, we're looking for an accessible 100% BNG without fail. And if that means buying extra land to do that, we always try and aim to do that on site rather than off site. That's something we seek to do as well. All of our staff internally are trained to at the highest of standards. We bring in experts to make sure all of our project developers have a full understanding of new techniques, new technology, the best of technology. So everyone is fully up to speed with all the industry standards. We are supported internally, so the project developers by planning team. So I've got a planning team of 5 to provide all that much needed knowledge and expertise alongside our suppliers. We also seek to have the best of suppliers supporting us in the industry and ensuring that our projects are the best in the industry.
Okay, thanks. I'll probably go 3, 2, 1 in terms of the questions. So for the third question, which was about sort of international collaboration, I completely agree that it is. You know, why don't you see it more often where people take ideas from other countries? And I think it is something that we certainly try to do as much as we can. You know, you look to Holland, for example, where you've got these amazing sort of rewilding sites, which then the UK has tried to copy a little bit and has had some fantastic success in doing. Probably the premier rewilding site in the UK was modelled or inspired by the Dutch rewilding site. So I think that there is some sort of copying that goes across. The big problem that you tend to find, of course, is that the sort of jurisdiction and cultural differences can really restrict and can really make it hard to take something that's happening and working really well in Honduras and do it in Mexico, because if you have a different jurisdiction, that can be a challenge. But I think certainly as much as we can, and I think we all love trying to do that. The second question about compliance versus sort of intrinsic motivation. I think that both are true in reality. Sort of pragmatically, as we look at the organizations that are engaging with nature, then quite a lot of them do it because they either think they have to, or they think they're going to have to, and they're worried about the risk of not doing anything on their, the reputational risk. And so in a sense, they're doing it because they have to, but that, is that so bad? Probably not, because in a sense, as an organization, since the year dot, companies have been trying to manage reputational risk and have been trying to make sure that their assets from one way or another are protected. So I kind of think that's fine. But then you also have the more sort of inherent risk that some organizations face that can be mitigated by nature-based solutions. And a great example of that is things like flood risks. And if your organization is heavily dependent on coastal resources, then things like tsunamis and flood risk become very, very important. And so if you can then invest and put money into mangrove restoration, then you're not just protecting your own supply chain, you're making a big impact to the environment, but also you're potentially generating, again, a sort of an asset, something that can actually be traded. So there's a financial incentive as well. And so I think that all different ways can be true. Finally, in terms of the sort of connection with nature and how you do that, I think at a grassroots level, similar to what Mike was saying, then in particular in cities, that's where you have this nature deficit, the most of this big disconnect. And so at a grassroots level, then public parks, those sorts of easy access to nature is something which in this country, hopefully the government will continue to put funds into, because I think it's going to fundamentally make a difference. But then at a wider scale, at the investment scale, then I think that all organizations engaging in a nature-based solution need to factor in the importance of taking the executive team or taking decision makers into nature at some point. And that can be, that means you have to have a budget somewhere to do a trip with investors or to do a trip with the people that are going to make some decisions, because I've certainly seen it, where we've taken groups from a bank who are wondering about the risks of doing a project in Honduras or something like that. You take them into the area, you show them actually what's happening, and when they can see the impact that it's having on people's lives, they can see the impact on communities, but they can also see trees growing, or they can see a landscape changing, then that really can be a light bulb moment. It can really change things. And so I think that everyone needs to consider that part of the communication.
I'd like to thank you for the really great questions. They're spot on and very aligned with the topic. And I'd like to thank the panel for their time and really valuable insight. Again, it's a complex topic, so let's carry on the conversation over lunch. Thank you.